steel, firearms, and the industrialists crossing into another world. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 376 Seeing Injustice. My life, in a brightly lit, decadent bar, a young man slumped on a sofa, his right hand limply holding a wine glass, letting out a sigh of near despair. Across from him, a slightly older man was embracing a heavily made-up woman, constantly telling bawdy jokes and broken Hunza, the woman occasionally laughing in response. This was Friedrich Lister and his companion McKinley. Last night, the church raided their inn, searching each room for so-called wizards and witches, causing utter chaos. When McKinley knocked on Lister's door this morning, he found him somewhat incoherent, repeatedly muttering about women and antidotes. Lister recounted the events of the night to him. McKinley outwardly expressed sympathy, but inwardly thought the young man was probably having some kind of erotic dream. Naked? Normal. A dagger to his throat? Quite the heavy taste. Let's take him to the red light district to clear his head. We can reimburse him later under the guise of treating business partners to dinner, haha. And so, this scene unfolded. My life? It was just beginning, and it's already ending. A few drinks only intensified Lister's sorrow. He radiated negativity. Guest, like McKinley, Lister was accompanied by a flamboyant woman, awkwardly forcing a smile. She tried everything to cheer up the sign guest, but to no avail, leaving her feeling frustrated. She couldn't understand the Ualdo he was muttering to himself. Lister, really, McKinley, sitting opposite him, couldn't stand it anymore. How can you treat such a beautiful lady like that, he said, giving the woman beside Lister a flirtatious wink, eliciting a coquettish laugh. Alright, stop wallowing in your fantasy and look at the beauty of reality, Lister said dejectedly, clutching his head. I'm not kidding. If I don't get the antidote from that woman, I'll really be buried far from home, McKinley scoffed. You're so dreamy you can't distinguish between fantasy and reality. I asked the waiter, and up until I got to your room, I didn't see any women coming in or out of the hotel. Lister's eyes widened. I told you, that woman is a witch, SHH, McKinley quickly covered his mouth. Don't mention the word. Although I don't know how sensitive this place is to witchcraft, we should still be careful. He glanced at the two hostesses, their expressions didn't change. Confirming they didn't understand their Aldo language, he breathed a sigh of relief. You don't really believe in some kind of magic, you know what? I think it's just some thugs who've sided with the church trying to extort money from us outsiders, Lister said gravely in a low voice. Believe it or not, a woman inexplicably appeared in my room last night, and I'm 100% sure the church's actions are related to her. Seeing Lister repeat himself again and again, McKinley began to waver. Could he be telling the truth? Suddenly, the sound of shattering dishes and glasses shattered, shattering the lively atmosphere in the shop. Everyone in the room looked towards the source of the sound. There, a table had been overturned, and a drunken man was acting out. He held a glass in one hand and grabbed a woman's collar with the other. Drink. Drink it, several other men cheered, lewdly eyeing the woman's body. The poor woman seemed somewhat incoherent, but still stretched out her hands, trying to push him away. What? You're not giving me any face. The assailant shoved the woman onto the sofa, grabbed her hair, and yelled. I paid so much money, you have to do whatever I tell you to do, the woman screamed in pain as his hair was being pulled, while those around her laughed. This scene unfolded before their eyes, yet no one in the lobby stepped forward to stop it. A few sighed and left, preferring to ignore it. Outrageous, Lister was about to go over when his companion McKinley grabbed him. McKinley asked the two hostesses in Kagawa, who are those people? The two hostesses trembled at their sister's ordeal, their faces showing utter helplessness. Hearing McKinley's question, one of them said, Sir, don't mess with them. Those people are members of the church's Purification Squad. Purification Squad? Lister and McKinley both frowned. This was the second time they had heard the name of this organization. Is it a purification team conducting a witch hunt? Yes, another hostess said fearfully. If you offend them, you might become a suspect in their eyes. You might be burned at the stake, Lister and McKinley were quite surprised. Even though they knew there was a witch hunt going on in Horn Bay, they still thought what happened last night was just a low-probability event. But from the two hostesses, it seemed that the witch hunt was already quite widespread, especially affecting the lives of ordinary people. McKinley sighed. I didn't encounter this when I was in Nijmsburg last time. I didn't expect that only a few months later. He grabbed Lister's sleeve tightly. Don't be impulsive. Do you want to die? This guy actually wanted to go and uphold justice. Was he drunk? Let me go, Lister cried out in despair. Since I'm not going to get the antidote anyway, I might as well give my life for justice. He suddenly broke free from McKinley's grasp and rushed to the abuser's side, shouting fearlessly at the man who was a head taller than him. Are you even a man? How dare you bully a woman? The man stopped torturing the woman. Her face was bruised and battered beyond recognition, and turned to glare at Lister. The man's fierce gaze sent a shiver down Lister's spine, sobering him up a bit. A rude voice reached his ears. You foreign bastard, what were you babbling about just now? In his righteous indignation, Lister had spoken in Aldo. I said, you, as a man, can't do this to a woman. Lister switched to Humboldt, but due to his unfamiliarity with the language and the suppression of his momentum, he stammered out these words. The other customers in the lobby stared in shock at the foreigner who could barely speak. Some admired him, some felt ashamed, some were disdainful, and others, sensing things were about to escalate, quickly made their escape. Ha ha ha! After a brief moment of astonishment, the perpetrator's accomplices burst into laughter. Quintus. You've been looked down upon by this Aldo guy. Let this Yankee teach Quintus how to be a gentleman. I love watching hero saves damsels in distress. The taunts from his accomplices made the perpetrator, known as Quintus, blush deeply. Clearly, he was unhappy. Quintus clenched his fist. Aldo kid, looks like I'll have to teach you how to follow the rules of Master Quintus. Then he clenched his fist, his knuckles cracking. Lister swallowed hard. He was completely sober. He realized he'd been too impulsive. McKinley, you'd better run. Chapter 377 Someone shovels. The man called Quintus looked like a ruthless and aggressive fellow. His appearance easily reminded Lister of bandits and thugs, making it impossible to associate him with a member of the church. Quintus made no attempt to conceal his malice towards the provocateur. His massive body almost covered Lister, and, incited by his companions, illuminated by the candlelight in the hall, he twisted his terrifying figure, approaching Lister step by step. The assailant let out a sinister laugh. Come on, little end, let Grandpa Quintus teach you a lesson. Lister stood there, bewildered and helpless. Escape? At this close range, escape seemed impossible. Just as Quintus reached out and grabbed his clothes tightly, a loud shout came from the entrance of the hall. The guards are here. No one is to move. The voice drew the attention of everyone in the hall, and they all turned their gazes toward the door. Quintus, who was holding Lister, also stopped and looked at the intruder, his face still showing arrogance. A group of men, clad in armor and carrying long swords, stormed into the shop, appearing well-trained. The hotel owners had peeked out from behind the doorframe, glancing timidly at the scene in the lobby. He was likely the one who had summoned the guards. I received a report that someone is causing trouble here. One of the guards spoke. His armor was more elaborate and ornate than the others, adorned with beautiful patterns, suggesting he was the leader. So it's the guards. One of Quintus's accomplices stepped forward, blocking the man's path. He dropped his earlier schadenfreude and chuckled. Misunderstanding, 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 the guard captain questioned, removing his helmet to reveal a handsome young man. His gaze lingered for a moment on the overturned table and the shards of broken cups and plates scattered on the floor. I don't think this is a misunderstanding, I say. Quintus, still clutching Lister's clothes, spoke up. Gentlemen of the guards, you are doing your duty, and we are doing ours. It's best if we don't interfere with each other. The accomplice blocking the way for the guards repeatedly winked at him, finally silencing him, though he still maintained an air of what can you do about it? The guard captain said discontentedly. What duty are you doing? I think you're clearly causing trouble. Lister, who had been subdued like a lamb, seemed to have grasped at a straw. In his desperation, he even spoke fluent Jaiaoan dialect. This sir must uphold justice for us. These bastards are bullying people. Do you see that poor woman? She really can't drink anymore, but these scumbags are forcing her to drink, and if she doesn't, they torture her, in broad daylight. Is this how humans do things? They should be thrown into jail. With a thud, a fist the size of a cooking pot slammed into his stomach. Lister, in pain, couldn't speak, only letting out a dry heaving sound. The man blocking the way for the guards draped his arm over the captain's shoulder, speaking with an air of familiarity. "Captain, we're all just trying to make a living in Nijbs. It's best to give each other some face." The young captain grabbed the arm on his shoulder and pulled him aside, nearly causing Quintus's companion to fall. "So disrespectful?" His brow furrowed. "Captain, may I ask your name?" Quintus's companion asked with ill intent, a venomous look on his face. "Quiller. Quiller Foster." A gasp of surprise and astonishment filled the hall. It was someone from the Foster family, and some who knew him whispered in astonishment, the second young master of the Marcus Foster's family. Regardless of the Foster family's overall standing, the patriarch, Marcus Foster, was a powerful figure in the most powerful council. Damn, they'd run into a tough nut to crack. This was the thought that flashed through the minds of everyone in the church purification team. In an instant, a young master from a powerful family parachuted into the guard unit for a gilded experience. The man who had been trying to get close to Queller earlier looked embarrassed. No wonder this young man looked unfamiliar. He had been in Niceburg for so many years, and had seen people from both the underworld and the legitimate world, but they were all people of the same social class as him. Today, he had unexpectedly encountered a real tycoon. Damn, was Niceburg really that small? Haha, Quintus's accomplice tried to put on a fawning smile, but couldn't stop the cold sweat from seeping from his forehead. "Young Master Foster, it was our fault today. We drank a bit too much. I apologize on behalf of the brothers. We'll lead them away from you right now." He waved his hand behind him. "Brothers, let's go." The members of the church purification team moved forward, avoiding Queller Foster's cold gaze, and were about to leave. Lister was also thrown aside by Quintus. He staggered and fell to the ground, panting heavily, the pain still throbbing in his abdomen from the punch. Just when everyone thought the matter was over, Queller Foster waved his hand. "Wait. Did I say you could leave?" The purification squad froze, stopping in their tracks. It was the same man who had been trying to ingratiate himself with Queller earlier, turning around and asking, "Does young Master Foster have any further instructions?" Queller Foster said sternly, "Since I'm in the position of captain of the guard, I absolutely cannot be careless when it comes to security matters. You," he pointed to Quintus and the others. "And you," he then pointed to Lister and the barmaid. "Come with me, all of you, and let's get to the bottom of this." The purification squad's faces instantly turned grim. Quintus pushed aside his companions, seemingly reckless, and said, "Young Master Foster, I know you look down on us lowly fry, but please consider, how will Bishop Elvis react to you if we are arrested? Though we are of humble status, we are still servants of the Lord of Light on earth." Queller Foster frowned. "What? Are servants of the Lord of Light exempt from earthly laws? The Marcus and Lord Elvis have always been on good terms. I hope you won't act rashly and damage the relationship between the two families. I think my father would support me in doing this." Quintus's eyes darted around, and he suddenly pointed a finger sharply at the hostess huddled in the corner. "Master Foster, do you remember what I told you at the beginning? What? We were just doing our duty." "Not again." "It's true. That woman is suspected of witchcraft. I was testing her. If she is confirmed to be a witch, we will bring her to justice." Quintus's words caused a stir, followed by complete silence. "No." A hostess, her face filled with terror, rose from the corner and rushed to Queller, kneeling down with a thud. "I'm not a witch. I'm not a witch. Master Foster, save me, please save me." Looking at the tearful girl, her face filled with despair, Queller Foster frowned. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 378 Advice. "I'm not a witch," the girl cried out to Queller, her expression breaking, as if the word witch carried a great curse. HMPH, Quintus walked over smugly, grabbed the girl's arm, lifted her up, and then covered her mouth. "Young Master Foster, we won't trouble your guards here. We'll take her to the church's dungeon for a thorough interrogation." Upon hearing this, his purification squad companions lost their earlier wariness of the guards, instead displaying lewd expressions. Queller frowned, seemingly pondering his next move. Involving a wizard was certainly a complicated matter. Just then, a voice rang out, "Release this poor girl, you bunch of scoundrels." It was Lister. He walked indignantly to Queller and said anxiously, "Captain of the guard, I can testify that these so-called purification team members were just bullying that girl. Their talk of her being a witch is just something they made up to fool you. Do you think I can't see that?" Queller muttered to himself. Now that someone had testified, Queller's face hardened again, and he demanded of Quintus, "You say she's suspected of being a witch? What makes you suspect her? I can't let a law-abiding citizen be thrown into jail so easily." Quintus was speechless for a moment, then felt a surge of anger. This young master of the Foster family was too disrespectful. He had tolerated his initial show of power, but this repeated refusal to back down. Did he think the church was so easy to bully? Suspected of being a witch? Did he have to make up a reason on the spot? Quintus knew that with his group's limited intelligence, they were truly in a bind. They were quite adept at fighting and looting. Just as Quintus and the others were stunned, Queller snorted and said, "I'll do it myself." He then pulled out a milky white stone. Could it be? Could he actually possess that? The purification team's eyes widened in astonishment. "This is a magic detecting stone," Queller shouted, holding the stone high in the hall. "As long as this girl bears any trace of witchcraft, it will be easily detected." A chorus of surprised exclamations rippled through the hall, everyone staring intently at the milky white stone. "No wonder he's from a powerful family, he carries such a rare item with him." He then touched the stone to the girl's forehead. Unexpectedly, Quintus pulled the girl behind him, saying in an unfriendly tone, "Captain, this is a great insult to us, the servants of the gods on earth." Queller retorted, "I meant no insult. I was merely performing my duties as a guard." Neither side would back down, and the situation remained deadlocked. "Master Foster," a cold voice rang out, drawing Queller's attention. Everyone looked towards the entrance, where a man in armor slowly walked in. With his arrival, the temperature in the hall seemed to drop instantly. Someone noticed the 3 silver leaves pinned to his armor. "A paladin of the church, Servilius." Queller called out the man's name. The knight approached him and bowed. "I'm sorry, our men have caused you trouble." He then glanced at Quintus and commanded, "Bring her here." Quintus, who had been stunned ever since the knight entered, trembled and whispered, But, Lord Velius, what? You're going to disobey my orders?" No. I would never dare disobey your orders, Lord Velius." He pushed the girl he had just subdued forward with trembling hands. Queller quickly and lightly touched the stone to the girl's forehead. Everyone's attention was focused on the stone, while Quintus secretly swallowed. Several seconds passed, and the white stone remained unchanged. Queller looked at Quintus, his eyes sharpening. Young Master Foster, Quintus, his earlier composure gone, hurriedly explained, "If the other party hasn't been exposed to witchcraft recently, the magic stone won't work." Quintus, since she hasn't been exposed to witchcraft in the last few days, have you found any other clues? Before Queller could speak, the knight questioned him. This, Lord Vilius, Quintus stammered, cold sweat streaming down his face, unable to utter a coherent explanation. "I'm sorry. Lord Vilius, I was wrong, I've disgraced you." He suddenly knelt down, pleading with remorse. The knight didn't allow him to explain, kicking him in the chest, sending Quintus flying backward. "You're not just disgracing me, you're tarnishing the glorious image of the Holy Church." The knight's tone grew increasingly cold as he turned to Queller and said, "Young Master Foster, please handle him as a disturbance." "It's your right, thank you, Sir Velius." Despite saying this, the distance in Queller's tone was obvious. He knew this man and was well aware of the fanaticism for his faith hidden beneath his righteous exterior. This fanaticism could sometimes make people very irrational. The knight didn't say another word, waved his hand, and left. Quintus's companions quickly followed him, keeping a certain distance, and also hurriedly slipped away. Queller didn't care, his target was Quintus alone. Thank you, young Master Foster. You'll surely be rewarded for your good deeds." The girl who had almost been captured as a witch knelt on the ground, repeatedly thanking Queller. For her, it was like escaping a calamity. "Be more careful next time." After offering a few words of comfort to the girl, Queller ordered his men to take the dejected Quintus away, then looked at Lister beside him. "Judging from your accent, you're from the Northwest Bay." "Yes, sir, I'm from there," Lister replied hastily. Queller smiled. "Well, for some reason, I have a good impression of your place, so," he suddenly changed to a serious expression. "Here's a piece of advice, keep a low profile in Horn Bay, Especially don't get involved in anything related to the church. Now is a special time. I understand, thank you. Actually, Lister understood perfectly well without being reminded. Remember my words. Of course, I still appreciate your righteous act today, but, Queller patted his shoulder, even when you're standing up for the underdog, you should know your limits. I'll be more careful next time. Lister's face flushed red. Fall back. Queller waved his hand and led his men away. Phew, Lister wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. You bastard. You almost killed me. He took a hard punch to the back, and at the same time heard his companion McKinley's voice. McKinley? You're still here? I thought you ran away. Calling you a bastard is really true. Do you think I'm that kind of person? Oh well, let's go. Let's get out of this mess first. We'll settle the score with you when we get back. The two hurried through the now bustling lobby and headed outside. Along the way people constantly raised their glasses to List in tribute. Well done, Yankee. Cheers to justice. Cheers to fighting injustice. It was hard to tell whether they were genuinely paying tribute to him or mocking him. Chapter 379 Council. As its name suggests, the Zhao Alliance was a political alliance formed over a century ago by a dozen relatively weak city-states to protect their safety and wealth. It gradually developed into the most powerful political force in the Zhao area. Initially, the alliance wasn't called the Zhao Alliance. That name would have been too overtly assertive, given the existence of other large and small states and independent territories within the fragmented region of Zhao. However, as the alliance rose to prominence and achieved victory after victory in numerous wars, its confident leaders directly named their alliance after Zhao. In maritime trade beyond Zhao, backed by national strength, alliance merchants gradually gained a dominant position relative to merchants from other states. Consequently, many ordinary people outside Zhao equated the geographical term Zhao with the political term Zhao Alliance. The alliance's power center is called the Supreme Council. Initially, this body was a place for disputes among the city-state leaders, lacking substantial power over the entire alliance. However, due to various peacetime affairs, such as negotiating tariffs and mediating disputes among members, its influence gradually grew. Coupled with the catalyst of several wars, power gradually concentrated in the Supreme Council. Today, it possesses most of the powers of a central government, such as diplomacy, military affairs, and taxation, and is widely regarded as a nation. The council maintains a fixed membership of 150 members, all descendants of the powerful figures from the original city-states that founded the alliance. Council seats are hereditary. If a family line dies out, the last male relative inherits the seat and the family name. The head of the council is called the Speaker, elected every 5 years. The Speaker then selects 10 members as assistants, responsible for diplomacy, military affairs, administration, law, and other matters. The council holds at least 2 plenary meetings every month to discuss recent major issues. On this day, the council hall was filled with a tense atmosphere. Council members took turns debating, their words sharp and pointed, all on the same topic, the Hornbay Alliance's attitude towards the church. Honorable councillors, a councillor declared from the platform, his face contorted with grief, I urge you to examine yourselves and feel whether you still possess the passion of a Hornbay noble. If your hearts haven't grown cold, if your passion still remains, can you turn a blind eye to the numerous crimes the Church has committed against the citizens of the Alliance? Since the Church launched its witch hunt, they have plundered so much wealth from our citizens under the guise of cleansing heretics. Even more terrifying than the plundering is their disregard for human life. How many innocent people have perished? Tears streamed down his face as he spoke. The Church has gone too far. It's time to make them rein themselves in. His words resonated with many, who echoed his sentiments. Therefore, we must swiftly take strong and effective measures to protect the citizens of the Alliance from the poison of the Church. But not everyone agreed with his conclusion. They rose from their seats, booing loudly. Horace, you treacherous fellow. Don't think we don't know what you're up to. Someone rushed to the podium, loudly rebuking Horace, who had spoken earlier. Hey, Simmons. You need to maintain order in the hall. Horace was very displeased. To hell with maintaining order in your meeting, Simmons shouted at the crowd. Gentlemen, listen to the vile language Horace used. Disregard for human life, poisoning. Can such words be used to describe the church that serves the Father? I admit that there will be some radical measures in the witch hunt, causing some misfortunes that no one wants to see, but this is unavoidable, a price that must be paid to protect us ordinary people from greater evil. Horace, standing nearby, shouted, "Listen to what Congressman Simmons is saying. Is this even human language?" His supporters, who had previously booed Simmons, knew he was a devout church believer. HMPH. Horace, don't think I don't know what you're up to. Simmons remained unmoved and continued addressing the crowd. As you all know, Horace's family is in the slave trade. Some time ago, his auction house was vandalized by a group of well-meaning believers, but the guards didn't arrest many people. Horace suspects that the church has hidden these believers, which is why he's so eager to incite us to oppose the church. This is revenge, and without any evidence, just based on suspicion. Shut up, Simmons, Horace said angrily, pointing his finger at Simmons's nose. I'm acting entirely out of public interest. I know you're a devout believer, but don't let your piety blind you. My business is legitimate, and I've suffered huge losses because of a bunch of people using the name of the Lord of Light. I'm also a believer in the Lord of Light, and I pay my tithes every time. As the shepherd of the Father, shouldn't the church uphold justice? Shouldn't it allow the evil lambs of the flock to bully the good lambs? Simmons ignored him and shouted to the crowd, "Listen to this, everyone listen to this. Isn't this revenge?" He admitted it himself. Shut up. I never admitted it. The two argued fiercely on the platform, and their respective supporters below joined in the argument. For a moment, the entire hall was like a bustling marketplace, deafeningly noisy. Silence. Silence. The current speaker took a gavel and pounded on the wooden table, finally calming the nearly chaotic meeting. Now it's Congressman Foster's turn to speak. As soon as he finished speaking, Joe Foster, the Marquess of Foster, walked slowly to the podium. Horace and Simmons, who had been standing on the platform, exchanged a glance and snorted, then left from their respective sides. The Marquess cleared his throat and said solemnly, "Gentlemen, I don't want to preach any grand theories, but simply state a fact. Since the witch hunt began, the Alliance's import and export trade has shrunk year by year, and it's not just our alliance. Commercial activity throughout Horn Bay is declining, and commerce is the very foundation of our nation." His words were like a gust of cold wind, sending a chill down the spines of everyone present. I believe that each of us has sufficient devotion to our Heavenly Father, but devotion alone cannot fill our stomachs. Only by addressing our basic physiological needs can we fulfill our obligations as believers and better serve our Heavenly Father. Therefore, I agree to impose some restrictions on the Church's actions within the Alliance's territory. Someone in the audience said, "But Your Excellency, the Alliance alone cannot contend with the Church." "That is another fact." The Marquess nodded and said, "Therefore, I would like to once again invite other nations to discuss countermeasures." Last year, the Horn Bay Alliance held a conference of all nations, but due to various obstacles, mainly the Church, no substantial results were achieved. Chapter 380 Goshen. After Joe Foster offered his suggestion, a heated discussion broke out again in the hall. "Your Excellency, the last meeting has already alerted the Church. Would convening another conference targeting them provoke retaliation?" Some councillors were concerned. Before the last meeting, the Church had secretly ordered the kidnapping of the Duke of Eaton's sister-in-law. Fortunately, she was rescued, preventing a major diplomatic crisis. They still felt a lingering fear. Marcus Foster responded, "That time we were unprepared and didn't expect them to use such methods. I think this time, as long as we are well prepared, there shouldn't be any major problems." One advantage of being a counselor is the ability to openly discuss anything in the name of protecting the Alliance's interests, including measures against the Church, which is considered sacred and inviolable by the common people, without fear of incurring charges such as blasphemy. Although the Church is powerful, the Horn Bay Alliance is ultimately in the hands of the descendants of its founders. Although the devout believer Simmons was furious at Horace and Foster for trampling on his faith, he couldn't truly stop them. After all, devout believers like him were a minority in the council. Since you're in the game of power, you have to play by the rules. Speaker, Marcus. Honorable councillors, Simmons stood up, drawing everyone's attention. I want to remind you that even if we can unite the power of the entire Corner Bay Kingdom, the Corner Bay Church has powerful backers. The papacy is a behemoth. All the churches in every country and region on the continent respect and are subject to its control. If we take any drastic measures against the Corner Bay Church and anger the papacy behind it, in the worst-case scenario, we might face the wrath of all human civilization. Actually, he was exaggerating a bit. The relationship between the papacy and local churches could be compared to that between a secular king and local lords. Just as there are local lords who outwardly obey the king but inwardly defy him, There are local churches who outwardly obey the papacy but inwardly defy it. Councillor Simmons, or perhaps I should call you Pius Simmons, we are not taking any extreme measures, but simply to protect the normal commercial order of Horn Bay. It is the church that is truly taking extreme measures. Their witch hunt has severely impacted our daily lives. Horn Bay is now infamous, and outsiders who come to Horn Bay are most afraid of being accused of witchcraft. How can they do business if this continues? From morning till night, the council debated this matter all day, and ultimately, the faction supporting restrictive measures against the church prevailed. Bang! 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 The speaker, presiding over the meeting, banged the table forcefully with a wooden mallet, silencing the hall. Now, I announce the start of the vote. Please, all councillors, value your sacred vote. It will determine our next policy. While the Horn Bay Council was engaged in heated debate, a handover ceremony was also taking place in the Nisberg Cathedral. Elvis, the Bishop of Nisberg, but from today onwards, he would no longer hold that position, for he had taken on a higher one, the Archbishop of the Horn Bay region. The former was merely the Bishop of Nisberg and its surrounding area, while the latter was the Archbishop overseeing the entire Horn Bay region. Although Nisberg was just a city, its status as the capital of the Horn Bay Alliance was special. Its bishops held positions comparable to those of the smaller Horn Bay kingdoms. The position of Alliance Bishop would be held by another highly respected priest, Angelo. In truth, Elvis didn't entirely agree with Angelo's appointment, because within the church, Angelo had consistently objected to his witch hunts, criticizing his actions as too radical or dogmatic, leading to many wrongful convictions and damaging the church's image. It was outrageous. Didn't he know the principle of better to kill 1,000 innocent people than let one guilty person go free? Witchcraft was like the fangs of a venomous snake. Once bitten, one had to be prepared to have the entire arm amputated. However, Angelo's appointment was the papacy's decision, and he couldn't stop it. Horn Bay was wealthy, a significant source of religious tax revenue, and the papacy maintained tight control over the churches in the region. Moreover, Angelo, a monk by birth, was indeed highly respected within the Nisberg Church, and being a local, he was qualified to succeed him. Congratulations on your promotion, Archbishop of Horn Bay, Lord Elvis. The ceremony was presided over by Anthony, a special envoy from the Holy See's capital, who congratulated Elvis. What promotion! Regardless of rank, we are all servants of God. Elvis's face was full of humility, but his eyes held gratitude as he looked at Anthony. Anthony had hinted during his last visit to Horn Bay that his mission was to assess the character of bishops in various regions, providing a reference for the Holy See's selection of a new Archbishop of Horn Bay. Now that he had achieved his desired position, Anthony must have spoken highly of him. Of course, his own excellent performance was paramount. Over the past year, he had devoted himself tirelessly to eradicating heresy in the Nisberg area. Well said, Anthony said with a broad smile, turning to Bishop Angelo beside him. Congratulations, Your Excellency Angelo. Angelo nodded modestly. I will certainly live up to the Father's glory and fulfill the duties of a shepherd. Bishop Angelo, I think it's necessary to remind you, Elvis said to him, after I leave, the witch hunt in Nisberg must not be relaxed in the slightest. Although Nisberg was the capital of the largest political power in Horn Bay, it was not the residence of the Archbishop of Horn Bay, and the secular power there was relatively strong. The Archbishop of Horn Bay resided in Collins, a monarchy in the inland kingdom of Horn Bay, where everyone from the king to the commoners was a devout believer and would obey any instructions from the Archbishop without question. I will follow your instructions, Your Excellency Elvis. Angelo hesitated for a moment before replying. Today was the day of their promotions, and it was best not to make things too awkward in front of the papal envoy. Elvis sensed Angelo's reluctance. He sighed, realizing he couldn't trust someone like Angelo with the affairs of the Church of Nisberg. However, he was now the Archbishop of Horn Bay, and with his position and the faction he had left behind, he had plenty of ways to exert influence over Nisberg. If he discovered any ill intentions from Angelo, he would remove him. Anthony, observing the atmosphere between the two, a glint of something unreadable flashed in his eyes. Chapter 381 Chaos. In the port of Nisberg, Friedrich Lister stood on the dock seeing off his companion McKinley. Be sure to give my regards to the people of my hometown. Alright, I'll remember. Honestly, I envy you still being able to enjoy some time here. McKinley would lead the recruited craftsmen back to the Northwest Bay by ship, While Lister would stay behind to inspect the bay for a while and establish an office and liaison point for his boss in Niceborg, McKinley patted Lister's shoulder. "We have a deal. Don't cause trouble after I leave." Lister pouted. "What trouble have I caused?" McKinley frowned. "HMPH. What happened on the red light district that day still gives me chills. Don't cause trouble in unfamiliar territory. We're leaving. Hurry up and get on the ship." Just as he was about to continue nagging, a sailor's shout came from the ship. "Sigh, we're leaving. Remember my words. We'll go for a drink together when we get back." McKinley had no choice but to walk towards the gangplank. After waving goodbye to his companions, Lister felt a wave of relief wash over him. He'd been nagged countless times about what happened in the red light district recently, and now he finally had some peace and quiet. Strolling through the streets of Nejbsburg, Lister decided to give himself a day off. It was so nice to be alone. "Have you heard? The Purification Squad captured a group of wizards." "I know, they're supposedly imprisoned in the cathedral dungeon. I guess there will be another public burning at the stake soon." "Burning at the stake? How horrible." "Sigh, those wizards are really pitiful. I've never seen them cause trouble before. It's just that horror stories make them out to be something special." SHH, don't let the church hear. Lister overheard this kind of gossip on the street, and he couldn't help but think of what happened at the inn that night. Sigh, he hoped that woman wasn't among those wizards. Well, although she'd given him a bit of a fright, she hadn't really hurt him, and she was quite beautiful. "Let's find a restaurant to fill our stomachs first." His shoulder was suddenly shoved hard, the force so great that he lost his balance and fell to the ground. Lister looked up in annoyance. "Who is it? How rude." He saw that the person who pushed him was a burly man with his arms outstretched, holding a short sword in each hand. It was this man who had suddenly sprang up, his arms hitting Lister. If his movement had been any stronger, the blades in his hands would have grazed Lister's face. What made Lister want to curse but dare not was that the other man wore a badge with a church symbol on his chest. What bad luck. He hurriedly got up from the ground and moved aside. It was obvious that the other man wasn't paying attention to him, so he quickly left the center of the conflict. Not only Lister, but the people around also consciously made way for the burly man, leaving a large open space. Only one person, wrapped in a cloak, stood motionless, less than 10 meters in front of the burly man, with his back to him. The burly man grinned maliciously. "How, your senses are pretty sharp. You're obviously not an ordinary person. Turn around, let me take a good look at you." He strode towards the other man, his hands still gripping his short sword tightly. "I have a kind of intuition, an intuition for witchcraft. When you passed by me just now, I felt a sense of familiarity. Stranger, cooperate with my inspection. Disobeying our purification team won't end well." The person in front of him remained motionless, speaking in a low but clear voice. "HMPH. It's that so-called God's lackey." It was a woman's voice, and the atmosphere on the street suddenly froze. People around looked at the cloaked figure with incredulous eyes. Even the burly man who claimed to be from the purification team stopped, his mouth agape, as if he doubted he had heard correctly. He'd already identified himself as part of the purification team, and now he said something like that. Wasn't this a slap in the face to the church? Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. The burly man laughed instead of getting angry, as if he'd heard the funniest joke in the world. What courage! What courage! After laughing, he immediately put on a ferocious expression. "Lift your head and look. What building is that ahead?" The cloaked figure didn't move, but Lister looked in that direction. A towering, pointed building came into view. Had he unknowingly wandered into the vicinity of the cathedral? The burly man roared. "I don't care if you are a wizard or not. Just the fact that you uttered such blasphemous words to my face is enough to charge you with blasphemy. Everyone here can witness it. I'll tie you to the stake and burn you alive." "Burn you alive? Then we'll see what you're capable of." Although the burly man was full of arrogance, the cloaked woman still spoke in a calm and unhurried tone. She turned around and slowly removed the hood that had been covering most of her face. Lister was so shocked he almost cried out. The face was none other than the witch he had intimately slept with that night at the inn. How could she be here? As a witch, venturing near the church's headquarters in Nejbsburg, wasn't this just walking into a trap? The witch tossed her cloak behind her, revealing her inner attire, hunting clothes and tall leather boots, making her appear very capable and exuding a heroic air. "I'll show you my skills now." "Ha!" The burly man licked his lips, shouted, and charged forward. In a flash, the witch flicked her hand, scattering a powdery substance that flew in the man's path. Then, she pointed ahead with her index finger, and a large cluster of flames suddenly appeared out of thin air, followed by a blinding burst of light. Lister felt a blinding white light before his eyes, then he couldn't see anything at all, like staring at the midday sun. He instinctively turned his head to avert his gaze, but immediately darkness returned, and his head spun. Ugh, this is awful. He rubbed his eyes hard, and it took him a while to see his surroundings clearly. The street was now in chaos, filled with a deafening cacophony. Shouts of witch, sorcery, run, echoed all around, the events of the moment convincing them that the cloaked figure was indeed a witch. Despite the growing resentment towards the church for its wrongful convictions during the witch hunts and the profiteering of some clergy, the terrifying image of wizards remained deeply ingrained in people's minds. The sudden appearance of a wizard on the street triggered an immediate instinct to flee. However, the street was crowded, and the light from the magic had left many disoriented, causing a stampede and collisions. In reality, not many people had actually escaped. Lister staggered and ducked behind a pile of barrels on the side of the street, looking towards the spot where the witch had stood. It was now empty. The burly man, initially stunned by the spell, had recovered. The witch's magic had caused more than just dizziness. The flames she unleashed had struck the charging man squarely. However, the flames weren't very powerful and didn't cause him much damage. His clothes and hair were singed, and his once brown skin was covered in soot, leaving him looking disheveled and completely different from his earlier imposing figure. Damn it! That damned witch! That damned sorceress! I curse you, may you go to hell! He opened his eyes to find his target had vanished, and cursed loudly. I will catch you! No wizard has ever escaped my grasp, he roared at those around him. Everyone stay where you are. I'm checking everyone. He feared the cloaked woman might be hiding in the crowd and escape in the chaos. Damn it, her cloak was a common style in Nisburg, one glance would reveal several. But if he could just order the ordinary people to stay still, the one trying to escape would definitely be the sorceress. Unfortunately, in the chaos, no one listened to him. Even though he was a member of the church's purification team, the streets were still in complete disarray. Damn it! These cowardly fools. At first, he only had suspicions about the woman who brushed past him. Unexpectedly, they actually encountered a witch. A mere witch, actually strolling near the cathedral. How utterly disrespectful to the church. They absolutely couldn't let her get away, otherwise the purification team and even the Church of Nisburg would lose all face. Woo, woo, the burly man took the horn that had been hanging at his waist and blew it loudly towards the sky. His reinforcements would arrive soon. Chapter 382 Declaration of War. You're dead, get out here right now, damn it, you filthy witch. After blowing a series of horn blasts, the burly man from the purification team shouted at his surroundings, his eyes bulging. A loud bang followed, and an explosion suddenly occurred at a street corner not far away. The crowd in the street became even more chaotic, and the chaos spread further and further. Those further away might not know what had happened, but it certainly wasn't good news. Running was the best course of action. Damn it, the burly man pushed through the crowd and rushed to the vicinity of the explosion, but apart from a few people lying on the ground groaning, he found no useful clues. Just then, a series of loud bangs rang out, and explosions occurred one after another in the street, followed by even greater chaos. The burly man trembled, seemingly out of anger, or perhaps fear, near the cathedral. What blasphemy! A terrified scream came from the end of the street, and the crowd in the distance scattered in panic. Several knights clad in silver helmets and armor charged forward on horseback, followed by a large group of armed men. They showed no regard for the people in the street, rampaging through the crowd. The group reached the burly man, and the leading knight asked, "What happened? Why did you send such a distress signal?" The burly man hurriedly replied, "A dangerous witch is roaming near the cathedral." The knight's eyes widened suddenly, the glint in them causing the burly man to instinctively take a few steps back. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, Lord Velius. Look at me, it's all her doing. And that series of explosions earlier, she was the one who caused it." Velius didn't waste any words and immediately ordered his men, "Seal off all the nearby streets and search every person in the crowd." "But, Lord Velius, that witch might have already escaped during the chaos," one of his subordinates said, doubting the effectiveness of this measure. "Then contact the guards and city guards to seal off the entire city," Velius shouted excitedly. "This is a provocation, a blatant provocation. This is a declaration of war against the Lord of Light and his servants on earth. And we must respond to this provocation, my lord. We'll seal off the streets right away." His subordinates felt it best not to trouble the guards and city guards yet, as their relationship with the church had been somewhat delicate recently. HMPH. Fellow members of the church, you really don't need to go to so much trouble, a provocative female voice rang out. Which, you really have guts, Velius frowned, quickly pinpointing the source of the voice. Anyone daring to be so arrogant at this time was most likely the person they were looking for. A woman in a cloak walked slowly towards them. The burly man immediately stepped forward and testified, "It's her, it's her. Lord Velius, she's the one who caused all that." "Ha ha ha, you blasphemous witch. Lord Velius is a renowned sorcerer and judge. While you still enjoy the twilight of your life, repent to the Lord of Light, so that your soul may suffer less in hell." The entire church stood ready, their eyes fixed on the approaching witch. "Repent." The witch stopped, removed her hood, and revealed a head of beautiful chestnut hair. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but not only will I not repent to the gods, but," she proclaimed loudly, "I here and now declare to the world, I, Sivia Estini, declare war on the Church of Horn Bay from this day forward, and we are sworn enemies." The church's knights and soldiers fell into a brief silence, as if they hadn't understood the witch's words. It took Velos, the leader, a while to react. He muttered to himself, "Arrogance. This is utter arrogance." Indeed, wizards had always acted like rats in the sewers, fleeing in panic at the first sign of trouble from the church. When had a rat ever approached a cat and challenged its natural enemy to war? A brief silence was followed by immense anger. Everyone was enraged by the witch's arrogance. Vilius took the spear handed to him by his attendant, pointed it forward, and declared righteously, "You disgrace to humanity, remnants of the demon race. Death has already bestowed upon you the greatest gift, yet you show no gratitude, and dare to presume to declare war on the Almighty Father and other holy servants of humanity. Today, I, Vilius, will uphold the supreme justice of the world and utterly eradicate all evil I have witnessed, which, prepare to die." With that, he spurred his horse forward, charging straight at the woman who called herself Sivia Estini, while his men split into two groups to flank her. The witch, now the target, stood rooted to the spot, her face displaying an expression of mixed sorrow and disdain. "How, a disgrace to humanity? To condemn us with baseless accusations based solely on some ancient, fabricated legends? What unforgivable things have we done? Are we condemned simply because we possess abilities we can't even explain?" Vilius remained unmoved by her words. Just meters from his target, his mount suddenly leaped high into the air, and he raised his spear. "Die? Go to hell and repent for your sins." The spear, with its sharp point, thrust forward. In a flash, a loud crash echoed as the spearhead stopped abruptly just centimeters from the witch's chest. It was as if an invisible shield stood before her. Lister, hiding behind a pile of barrels, stared wide-eyed. He had never witnessed such an illogical scene before. Strangely enough, at the moment the spear thrust forward, his heart leaped, and subconsciously he hoped for a miracle, that the woman would be spared. Now, a miracle had indeed occurred. Sivia Estini's lips curled slightly. "Ha! Knight, don't underestimate a well-prepared wizard." Velius withdrew his lance, unsurprised. "I've seen this kind of trick before." Men, at this moment, the church's men had already surrounded the witch. Hearing Velius's summons, 4 tall, burly men stepped forward from the ranks, each wielding a large iron hammer. They approached the witch from 4 directions. "Oh? How about this trick?" The witch's lips moved slightly, as if she were muttering something softly. Velius became more alert. The other party must be casting some kind of evil magic. He carefully observed the witch and her surroundings, looking for any clues. Retreat. When his eyes caught sight of a blurry pattern around where the other party stood, a bad feeling washed over him. He sharply turned the reins and shouted a warning to his men. However, it was too late. Strange lights appeared on the ground around Sivia, and in an instant, fierce flames rose up. The 4 strong men happened to step on the fire, and the flames immediately climbed up their bodies and spread, as if they were soaked in oil. Chapter 383 Prison Break. "Ah! It hurts, help me!" Heart-wrenching screams rang out as 4 burly men, engulfed in flames, cried out and rolled on the ground, trying to extinguish the flames. Their companions hesitated, unsure if they too would fall victim to the witch's evil spell if they approached rashly. 3 men gradually lost their mobility due to the torment of the flames, while one rolled a little further away, landing at the feet of his companions. Fortunately, they were at a construction site, where his companions poured sand over him, saving his life. Evil spell. Evil witch. Vilius was enraged as he watched his men die before his eyes. However, his mind wasn't clouded by anger. Having received years of training in the church and frequently interacted with the wizards, Vilius knew that magic followed the principle of equivalent exchange. The greater the power and the better the effect of the spell, the greater the price the caster had to pay. Rare spellcasting materials and lengthy preparation time are prerequisites for powerful magic, and the preparation process often involves immense mental strain on the caster. In the past, the relationship between wizards and the church in the Hornbay region was like that of mice and cats. Wizards lived a precarious life under the church's relentless pursuit, fleeing at the slightest sound. Those who couldn't escape would be ambushed by the church's armed forces. Outnumbered and outmatched, even offensive spells were no match for the church's numerical superiority. Therefore, their carefully prepared spells often focused on concealment and escape. Because almost no wizard prepared spells with the intention of inflicting heavy casualties on church personnel, this fostered a sense of contempt among the church's armed forces. So, upon receiving the signal that a witch had appeared near the church, they were surprised but didn't make many preparations. However, it was clear that the witch before them had been planning this for a long time. Just as she had said, don't underestimate a well-prepared wizard. The series of explosions, the impenetrable protective spells, the flames that instantly ignited the enemy's body, these were no simple tricks, impossible to execute hastily. She must have secretly prepared this street for a long time, setting up magical traps that ordinary people couldn't detect. Her goal was to strike the church hard at some point, kill its members, and utterly disgrace it. That point could be sometime in the future, or it could be now. Vilius suspected the witch's identity was likely deliberately exposed. The latter possibility was more dangerous, indicating the witch had made thorough preparations for her attack. For a long time, the church had paid almost no attention to the vicinity of the cathedral, because it was the headquarters of the Nisberg Church. Why would a rat go to a cat's den? Wizards would be walking into a trap here. People habitually considered it a magic forbidden zone, creating a dangerous loophole. If a wizard with suicidal intentions wanted to create some disturbance near the cathedral, it wouldn't be difficult, provided they were careful and made some spellcasting preparations. Even since the witch hunt began, no witch had ever openly attacked the church, so this loophole had been unwittingly overlooked. More infuriating than the casualties of his men was the emergence of a witch actively attacking the church. This was a dangerous sign. It meant their enemy was no longer content with passive resistance but was actively attacking. The witch before him would serve as a powerful example for her kind. With the first, there would be a second, a third, until more and more witches joined the ranks of those actively attacking the church. Vilius thought of even more. Once they decided to actively resist the church, these witches would contact each other, no longer fighting individually. They would band together, they would become more strategic. I will never let you go, the knight hurled his lance fiercely. His powerful imagination made Vilius determined to kill the witch before him. He absolutely could not let her go, and he would make those who decided to follow her understand the price of actively provoking the church. Because of the witch's protective spells, Vilius had little hope with his shot. It was merely a venting of anger. But to his surprise, the spear paused slightly before the witch, then continued forward. However, since the shot itself was already fairly accurate, it flew just past her side. Her witchcraft is failing. Seize the opportunity and attack quickly. Even without Vilius's reminder, his men noticed the witch's change. Those carrying bows, crossbows, or catapults immediately drew their ranged weapons and prepared. Without knowing what other tricks the enemy might have up their sleeve, ranged weapons were the safest option. They didn't want to suffer the same fate as their 4 companions, burned to a crisp. With a whoosh, the first arrow shot towards the witch. At that moment, a large amount of smoke suddenly erupted from the street, the thickest where the witch stood, and her figure vanished instantly. The smoke seemed to do more than just confuse vision. Many people who came into contact with it experienced uncontrollable tearing. A scream rang out, followed by a figure collapsing. With a deafening roar, another explosion occurred, injuring several more people. Attention everyone! Assemble back to back, Vilius shouted the order to his men, surprised by this unexpected tactic. After several brothers fell, the thick fog began to dissipate, and the church members could finally see each other. But they still couldn't see the witch from before. Velius examined the fallen men. Some had their throats slit, others had horrific wounds, and judging from the color of the wounds, the weapons used were highly poisonous. Many were also injured in the explosions. The knight stamped his foot angrily. Damn it, of all times, when we're short-handed. Indeed, they were short-handed. The church had received news of a large-scale witchcraft gathering in the villages outside Niceburg, so most of their forces had been sent out and hadn't returned yet, leaving only a small squad in Niceburg under Velius's command. Something's wrong. Lord Velius. Something's wrong. Someone rushed over in a panic, calling his name. What happened? The knight asked angrily. Today had been unlucky and humiliating enough. He'd just counted, and over a dozen church members had been taken down without them even touching the enemy. The messenger stopped in front of him, bending over and panting heavily, clearly exhausted. The cell, he gasped. What happened to the cell? Hearing that word, Velius's heart clenched. He grabbed the messenger's clothes and lifted him up, demanding an explanation. The prisoners in the cell, they've been kidnapped. The messenger finally managed to cobble together. Ah, Velius cried out to the heavens. They'd fallen into a trap. The enemy had lured their last armed force out while the Niceburg church was short-handed. It was very likely that the news of the witchcraft gathering they'd received earlier was part of this conspiracy. After they were out, only a few sentries would remain inside the cathedral, allowing them to kidnap people. And the cathedral's prison held a group of wizards about to be burned at the stake. Chase them. Everyone, chase the prison breakers. He couldn't care less about the witch from before. If the imprisoned wizard escaped, he'd be too ashamed to remain in the church and would have to commit suicide as atonement. Everyone realized the gravity of the situation and frantically followed Velius. In the blink of an eye, the church members on the street were completely gone. In a chaotic and dark alleyway, a woman's figure gradually appeared. Upon closer inspection, her cloak was like a chameleon, blending seamlessly with the surrounding colors, making her difficult to spot. However, with careful observation, her identity could still be discerned. I hope those adventurers will keep their promise. Please, everyone in Lichman. After muttering these words to herself, her consciousness began to fade. She struggled to open her eyes, taking one last, wistful look at the now empty but sun-drenched street. Hell, the next time I open my eyes, I'll see a dark dungeon. The woman gave a bitter laugh, then collapsed to the ground, unable to hold on any longer. Chapter 384 Productivity. Time flies. Paul slumped back in his office chair, adopting a relaxed, reclining posture, and sighed. The courtyard outside the window was a sea of gold, leaves fluttered down from the trees in the breeze. Another autumn had arrived. A slightly melancholic atmosphere permeated the Earl's air. It had been 3 years since his soul had transmigrated to this world, resembling medieval Earth, or perhaps since he had awakened his past life's consciousness. What had he accomplished in these past 2 years? Had he abolished slavery? No, a large number of serfs in his territory still struggled to survive under the exploitation of landowners. Had he overthrown the feudal nobility? No, and he himself was a member of the feudal nobility. Had he elevated the status of the commoners? No, the commoners in his territory still trembled in fear before the nobles, not daring to utter a sound. Had he weakened the authority of religion? No, the people paid taxes not only to themselves, their lord, but also tithes to the church. Although some factories were established, giving rise to a new type of manufacturing industry within the territory, this only alleviated the financial crisis. It seemed that none of the substantive changes that had a significant impact on society had been successful. Whenever he tried to implement his grand plans, one group would oppose him, another. Honestly, he was clearly working for the future of human society, and history on another planet had already proven his claims correct. Why couldn't those people make a small sacrifice? The ambitious steps were one thing, but even a mere customs union was met with opposition. He was hitting walls everywhere. It was truly unworthy of the name of a transmigrator. His initial ambitions were being eroded by reality little by little. If things continued like this, he would probably degenerate into a mere idle nobleman. Paul recalled the little political knowledge he still had left in his mind. Ultimately, it all came down to the backwardness of social productivity. The lower base determines the superstructure. Lord Gleman, what were you saying just now? Paul's remark aroused the curiosity of everyone. The Lord's office was filled with the heads of various important departments of the State Council, all there for the Lord's weekly routine meeting. However, unlike usual, it wasn't held in the main hall. Paul had summoned them to his office. According to Bernard, the Lord's chief secretary, Paul Gleman hadn't left his chair since arriving that morning, except when he went to the toilet. The Lord seemed rather downcast lately. Paul raised an eyelid. I was saying that time is like a shuttle on a loom, rushing by without stopping. Everyone was puzzled. The Earl was only 16. Why do you make such a remark? Hansel asked, voicing their questions. Paul adopted a literary air. I saw autumn leaves falling just now, and this thought came to me. If one's life is merely wasted, in the end, one will fall as quickly as these leaves on the tree. So, Lord Gleman, how do you think one should spend their life to avoid wasting it? Hansel's question struck a nerve with Paul, sparking a desire to show off. Ahem, he cleared his throat loudly, striking a serious pose. The most precious thing a person has is life, and life is given to each person only once. The life I hope to live is one where, when I look back on the past, I will not regret wasting my years, nor be ashamed of having accomplished nothing, so that when I am called by the Lord, I can say without guilt, my whole life and all my energy have been dedicated to the most magnificent cause in the world, to fight for. Paul suddenly stammered. What should he fight for? Should he say in front of them that he was fighting for the liberation of mankind? At this moment, the people in the office had already been piqued by his long, passionate speech, and they all looked at Paul with expectant eyes, hoping to hear what the Lord wanted to fight for his entire life. Paul moved with stiff tongue and said, to fight for filling the bellies of the people. Damn, compared to the original, this is a huge drop in prestige. Clap clap clap. Old Ford, the chief executive of the State Council, was the first to applaud, and then everyone in the room joined in. Old Ford nodded, saying, Lord Gleman, this is the ideal a great lord should possess. Only those living in this era truly understood how distant the goal of filling the stomachs of the people was. They knew it better than Paul, who came from the 21st century on Earth. Hansel poured a little cold water on the idea, shaking his head, but unfortunately, no one has ever been able to achieve it, not even the legendary heroes and wise kings of history. Although Hansel came from a prominent family in the capital and had never lacked food or drink since childhood, he had served as a low-level tax collector for the royal family since adulthood, so he knew the hardships of the common people. Gabberns looked at Paul with admiration, but as long as we strive in this direction, even a small step forward will save many people. Haha, let's work together. The encouragement from the crowd gave Paul great confidence. The low spirits caused by the unsuccessful reforms disappeared, replaced by a sense of pride. Gentlemen, the Lord said, I believe the root cause of so many people going hungry is insufficient productivity in human society. Therefore, we must vigorously develop productivity. Productivity. The crowd heard a new term from the Lord, but it wasn't difficult to understand. You mean the ability of fields to produce crops? Because they had just discussed the problem of filling stomachs, they couldn't help but think of farming. Well, that's just one aspect. More broadly, it should be the ability to transform nature through the combination of able-bodied people and means of production, or humanity's ability to create new wealth. This goes beyond just farming. For example, mining, textiles, pottery, and so on. These can all be collectively called manufacturing or industry. Besides developing agriculture, these manufacturing industries are also areas I intend to vigorously develop, Old Ford said, but these industries don't produce food. Even if we develop them, the amount of food will remain the same. How will we solve the problem of hunger? So, Lord Gleman, I suggest you encourage the people under your rule to cultivate more arable land. That's the best policy. Paul raised an eyebrow. Oh, steward, let's not even talk about how even with the best efforts, the arable land is still limited. Based on the current arable land area, in a normal year without natural disasters, do you dare say that the harvested food is truly insufficient? This, if I issue an order to forcibly collect all the food from Arda, Berden, and Emden, and then distribute it equally to everyone, regardless of wealth or status, including myself, do you think anyone will starve to death this year? Everyone was shocked. How could the Earl have such a crazy idea? Haha, just kidding, everyone, don't be nervous. Old Ford breathed a sigh of relief, wiping the cold sweat from his brow. No one should starve to death. The reason we're not getting enough to eat is mainly because of the uneven distribution of food. Paul finished his sentence. The rats in the big landowners' granaries are fat and strong, while the poor are starving to death. He sighed sadly. How shameful. Everyone was speechless. Who is the biggest landowner in Arda? Was the Earl insulting himself? If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 385 Productivity 2. Then, Your Excellency, how can we change this situation and make the distribution of food more balanced? Cecil asked the question quite aptly. Paul gave him a satisfied look. He was a perfect straight man. He continued, to resolve the contradiction of landlords gorging themselves while others starve, we need to give others something valuable that can be exchanged for grain from the landlords. For example, porcelain, pottery, ironware, paper, clothing, machinery, wine, and so on. The industries that manufacture these things are what we call manufacturing, and the extraction of the raw materials for these items constitutes industry. The more manufactured goods we produce, the more grain we can exchange, and the more we can address the problem of uneven grain distribution. Steward Ford shook his head. I think it only provides temporary relief. Those landlords who hoard grain don't need many manufactured goods. The amount of grain they're willing to offer for exchange is ultimately limited. Paul waved his hand. Therefore, we must broaden our grain supply. If our local landlords are unwilling to offer surplus grain for exchange, then we will exchange with landlords in other parts of the Northwest Bay, with landlords in other parts of the Kingdom of Waldo, and even with landlords abroad. Everyone understood Earl Gleman's meaning. In this way, as the urgency of demand decreased, the relative value of the grain hoarded by the local landowners would decrease, or even depreciate, forcing them to participate in exchange activities, if they didn't want their wealth to shrink further. Is this the reason you proposed establishing a customs union? The female advisor, Lady Saoirse, suddenly realized this. Paul nodded. Yes, that's one important reason. Lowering tariffs will make it easier for our manufactured goods to go out and for foreign grain to come in, thus promoting the exchange process I just mentioned. I call it a market economy. Market economy? Another new term uttered by the Earl. Guy Burns, the manager of the Lakeside Machinery Factory, sat thoughtfully in a corner. He usually only focused on technical issues and didn't know much about other things. He was still wondering what caused so many people to willingly defy the Lord's authority when the Earl's proposal for a customs union was met with such resistance. Now he understood. It turned out the landlords' profits had been affected. Once manufactured goods and grain were circulating, they couldn't exploit others at will. These guys were truly despicable. Paul's next words made it even clearer to him. Throughout human history, due to underdeveloped productivity, the amount of grain grown and the goods manufactured to exchange for grain have always been limited. Grain is one of the most basic necessities of human life. People can live without alcohol, without pottery, and even without clothes, but they absolutely cannot live without food. Those who control grain and its means of production, such as land, have always held the advantage. If a place is relatively isolated and has low productivity, then in the process of trade, necessities like grain easily become a seller market, a market where the seller has the advantage. But if we improve our manufacturing capacity and open up domestic and foreign trade, we can change the seller's market in our area to a considerable extent. As for other places besides Arda, Bardine, and Emden, we can't worry about that for now. But Your Excellency, Paul's chief secretary, Bernard, thought further ahead. Even if you vigorously develop industry and produce many valuable goods, and the landowners are willing to trade, and given the current overall food production is sufficient to feed everyone, if some people don't starve, the population will continue to grow, while the food supply will remain the same. Eventually, we will return to a situation of supply falling short of demand, and people will still starve. The chief secretary's statement was very close to the Malthusian trap. Paul explained, as I just mentioned, productivity includes agricultural productivity. When our industry develops to a certain level, it can feed back to agriculture. He glanced at Guy Burns. The harvesters, seeders, and other agricultural machinery manufactured by the Lakeside Machinery Factory are a case in point. With these machines, we can cultivate more land and harvest more grain using the same amount of manpower. We can even research planting techniques to increase yield per unit area, thus meeting the needs of a growing population. Guy Burns proudly puffed out his chest. He had always considered his work to be great, and now the Earl was finally explaining its significance to everyone. Harvesters, seeders, and other agricultural machinery were invented and mass-produced only after the development of manufacturing. As long as the technology keeps up, it can alleviate or even solve the problems Bernard mentioned. As for what will happen when technology reaches its limit, I dare say none of you here can foresee it, haha. Thanks to Paul's efforts over the past 2 years, the mining, iron smelting, food processing, cotton textile, salt production, ceramics manufacturing, paper making, machinery manufacturing, and cold weapon manufacturing industries in Arda and Barden have shown some improvement. Due to technological secrecy, the production of porcelain, canned goods, and paper is unique in the world. Other industries are also in a very advantageous position due to technological innovations, such as the application of small blast furnaces, flying shuttle looms, spinning jenny, and the salt-making process. The start of manufacturing has created a large number of people who make a living from it. Although they still account for a small percentage of the total population, they have already reached a considerable scale in terms of numbers. The original manufacturing model of the Northwest Bay was mainly based on individual family workshops. In the past 2 years, under Paul's deliberate guidance and leadership, organized and large-scale factories have begun to spring up like mushrooms after rain. At the Earl's repeated orders, the council strictly prohibited factory owners from purchasing slaves, so these factories mainly obtained labor by hiring workers. Maintaining a certain degree of personal freedom while earning a living, working in factories became a new trend in the 3 territories under the council's jurisdiction. This was especially true for the vast rural population, some self-cultivating farmers who had poor harvests or were struggling to survive under the oppression of large landowners sold their land and went to towns to make a living. This indirectly promoted the concentration of arable lands and the growth of the urban population, beneficial to both agricultural and industrial development. Paul received sporadic reports that some serfs were even risking their lives to escape to towns to change their fate. So, gentlemen, in the current situation, where can we further improve our productivity? Does anyone have any good ideas? Faced with setbacks, Paul felt it was best to brainstorm and listen to the opinions of the world's natives. The author's understanding of productivity and economic activity is rather superficial. Please refrain from mocking any errors in this chapter. Chapter 386 New Industries. When Paul asked for their opinion, everyone was taken aback. The Earl always had his own ideas about how to develop the territory, and his strategies mostly yielded positive results. Even the few things that went wrong, as core members of the Council of State, they could judge from a long-term perspective that they were beneficial to society as a whole. Accustomed to acting according to the Earl's will, everyone frowned and pondered deeply. Gabberns was the first to jump out, raising his hand and shouting, "Of course, it's about expanding the scale of the machine factory and agricultural machinery factory, producing more machinery." He suddenly slammed his fist down, as if he had suddenly remembered something. "Inspired by you, I've recently made considerable progress in my research on steam power. If you could grant me a project and allocate dedicated funds, just like you did for those alchemists, we'd definitely be able to create even more efficient machines." Gabberns had been obsessed with the idea of using steam as a power source ever since learning about it from Paul, but the Earl strictly forbade him from using the machine factory's resources for this research. It could only remain a personal hobby for now. Let's hold off for now. Paul hesitated for a moment, then ruthlessly dashed Burns's hopes. The factory manager retreated to a corner, looking dejected, and began to ponder. But the Earl showed him no mercy. He wasn't joking. He'd painstakingly cultivated a skilled workforce, and he wasn't about to let a few machines wipe them out. With current transportation capabilities and consumption levels, once the true steam engine was widely adopted, most of his precious workers would be unemployed and forced to return to farming. That was Paul's assessment. He wasn't sure if he was right, but caution was always wise. His small territory couldn't afford any setbacks. But perhaps he could start researching boring machines first? "This thing can be used not only to process cylinders, but also to make better cannons, Your Excellency." Old Ford's words interrupted his thoughts. "Could we start with the fishing industry?" "Oh? Tell me about it." Old Ford stroked his beard and said, "In the past 2 years, under your orders, we have improved the transportation from Lakeside Town to Port Franklin, and several roads from Lakeside Town to Berdine and Emden are under construction. This means we can transport large quantities of fresh fish from the sea to the interior for sale. In addition, Our coastal residents are very skilled at salting fish, which can be preserved for a long time. Now that we have a method for large-scale salt production, this industry can be developed and expanded, and salted fish can be sold to other places. Paul nodded. That's a good idea, Bernard. Write it down. The chief secretary in charge of taking meeting minutes immediately began scribbling on the paper with his quill pen. Old Ford continued, to develop the fishing industry, we need a large number of ships, so our shipbuilding industry will also be stimulated. Paul agreed. You're right. Only with more orders can our shipbuilding capacity be sustained in the long run. However, the shortage of shipbuilding craftsmen is a major problem. Lord Gleman, I think private shipyards will soon be established. According to news from Port Franklin, merchants have already spontaneously gone to Cape Bay to recruit craftsmen. The two shipyards we currently have mainly serve the military, and I guess they want to be self-reliant. Paul was very happy. This is a good trend. You see, gentlemen? As long as we make good use of the profit-seeking nature of merchants, many things will fall into place. But he also had some concerns. Northwest Bay has always been considered a barren land by outsiders. Even with the power of the state council, the craftsmen recruited have only built 2 shipyards. Intelligence Chief Cecil said, Sir, the current situation in Cape Bay is very favorable to us. The witch hunt there is intensifying. He glanced worriedly at Laddie sitting next to the Earl, and only continued after seeing no emotional fluctuation on her face. This movement has begun to impact the daily lives of ordinary people, and even wealthy individuals are being affected. I suspect that behind the rising power of the local church, there must be a large number of discontented and even hateful people. Many people must want to move elsewhere, including experienced craftsmen, wealthy tycoons, and well-connected merchants. In the past 2 years, our Northwest Bay has gained a certain reputation in Horn Bay with its porcelain, paper, and other goods. Many people from there have come here to do business. If we put in a little more effort in promotion, Northwest Bay might become one of their choices. Paul stroked his chin. All right, you will be in charge of promoting Horn Bay. Make sure to improve the impression of Northwest Bay in the eyes of the locals. Yes, Lord Griles, but Cecil rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, making a gesture that everyone understood. Paul chuckled. Don't worry, as long as it's effective, I won't be stingy with money. You're brilliant, sir. Cecil happily retreated to the corner. Bringing in talent is important, but cultivating local talent is even more crucial. Paul said to Steward Ford, I think we can offer some preferential treatment to merchant ships from other places, especially those from Cape Bay. In exchange, they must hire a certain number of our people to work on their ships and learn various nautical skills in a real-world environment. Of course, it must be legitimate employment. The buying and selling of slaves is absolutely forbidden. Yes, Lord Griles. Old Ford nodded and noted it down. By the way, how's the nautical school that the Navy is jointly running with local merchants in Franklin Harbor? Everything's going smoothly. The first batch of students in the accelerated course are already practicing on board. Very good. Gentlemen, I want to show you a new contraption I've recently invented. Huh? The Lord has invented something new again? Paul clapped his hands, and 2 servants carried a cylindrical object into the room and placed it inside. It seemed to be a container. Then he brought out 2 cylindrical, black objects, lit them, and threw them into a cylindrical container. Then, everyone choked. A chorus of coughs filled the room. Oh dear. I forgot. Quickly, move them outside. Paul, covering his nose, hurriedly ordered the servants to move the things to the courtyard. Everyone followed. These are honeycomb briquettes I made from ordinary coal and clay. Paul held up one of the black objects and explained to everyone. The cylindrical shape had holes on both ends, making the name honeycomb briquette quite fitting. As for this stove, it's a special honeycomb briquette stove. And of course, it needs a chimney when burning indoors. Everyone gathered around the burning stove, carefully observing it. It wasn't autumn yet, and waves of heat emanated from the stove. Laddie asked him, since you've processed coal like this, there must be some advantages, right? Due to the development of the iron and steel industry under the State Council, coal was mined in large quantities. Besides supplying ironworks, it also entered thousands of households as fuel for cooking and heating. While not yet widespread in the newly annexed Emden, it was quite common in Arda and Bertine. Of course, Paul patted his chest. Look at its regular shape, it's easy to stack and use. And because of these holes, the contact area with air is increased, making it burn more efficiently than ordinary coal. If ordinary coal were a bit larger, The fire might go out before it's fully burned inside. You'll feel the difference once you use it yourself. Although no one in this world except him knew what oxygen was, they at least knew the concept of air and that better ventilation was more conducive to combustion. Wasn't that what the Earl invented the blower for? This is a godsend for families with limited means, Manager Ford exclaimed. Many people are reluctant to throw away leftover coal ash because some residue hasn't been completely burned, requiring the laborious process of picking it out to continue burning. With honeycomb briquettes, this has been a relief. Good, let the State Council take the lead, with officials and the public working together, to develop the honeycomb briquette industry, and so, fishing, shipbuilding, and coal processing were incorporated into the new development plan. I recently moved, and it's quite far from my workplace, requiring a 4-hour commute every day. I haven't adjusted yet, so please forgive me, readers. But I will try my best to adjust. Chapter 387 The Stalemate in the South. As the 10th month of the Holy Calendar 1993 arrived, winter began to set in across most of the Kingdom of Waldo, including the capital, Crystal Radiance. This rebellion must be quelled this year, Princess Catherine solemnly declared to her generals in the kingdom's army camp. Her generals nodded emphatically. The rebellion had dragged on for nearly 3 years since the spring of 1990, and the kingdom could no longer afford to wait. The year was drawing to a close, and with winter approaching, the supply of provisions would become increasingly difficult, meaning the decisive battle was imminent. They had already agreed on a date for battle with their adversaries, the Giles rebels. The challenge was proposed by the rebels, and the kingdom had agreed. It wasn't that either side was particularly chivalrous. In the past year, they had engaged in countless underhanded tactics against each other, flanking maneuvers, ambushes, feints. Every tactic available in warfare had been employed. The battle lines darted north and south, like a tug of war, each side desperately trying to win, yet the tide always turned back to the vicinity of Furier. When both sides were exhausted, it was only natural that they would wager their last ounce of strength in a final battle. Initially, many of the kingdom's generals were somewhat apprehensive about this final battle, because in early autumn, Duke Veblen, the largest lord in the kingdom's eastern border, had finally intervened, officially sending troops to join Giles's rebel army. This old fox, when Grand Duke Greedwolf launched his rebellion, did not stand up and clearly support the royal family like other lords, merely sending envoys to request a marriage alliance. After the royal family agreed, he reneged on his promise, then made statements about Gales possessing a certain degree of moral authority. This was practically a slap in the face to His Majesty the King. The problem was that after expressing support for Giles, he merely remained holed up in his own territory, not sending a single soldier to aid Giles. Duke Veblen was by nature an unpredictable and capricious man, so it wouldn't be surprising if he suddenly pledged allegiance to the royal family. However, he certainly had the means to be capricious. The Veblen family's territory was located in a large basin in the eastern border of the kingdom, surrounded by towering mountains, making it easy to defend and difficult to attack. Deploying troops to defend this strategic location meant that any attempt to invade would come at a considerable cost. Initially, Veblen intended to coordinate with Giles from the north and south, sending troops to attack the royally loyal territories in the east. However, the Eastern Army, perhaps skilled in defense but not offense, suffered a crushing defeat at their first fortress despite having overwhelming numerical superiority, creating numerous embarrassing incidents. The mountainous terrain of the eastern basin made entry and exit difficult, severely hindering supply transport. Frustrated, Duke Veblen had no choice but to send troops south to join forces with Giles's rebel army. This put considerable pressure on the kingdom's army. Fortunately, the army's equipment level has improved significantly this year, preventing the tide of war from turning in favor of the rebels. This equipment upgrade is thanks to the kingdom government's large-scale procurement in the Northwest Bay. Since the establishment of Northwest Industry, weapons production in the Northwest Bay has advanced by leaps and bounds. Due to revolutionary breakthroughs in iron smelting technology, blast furnace ironworks built in Arda, Byron, and Emden have provided a continuous supply of iron ingots to weapons workshops of all sizes. Craftsmen work in shifts, the clanging of metal working day and night. Swords, spears, arrows, and armor converge on fuel import from various territories, then are loaded onto ships along with other procurement materials from the kingdom government, such as grain, canned goods, cloth, and clothing. These are transported to ports directly controlled by the Southern Kingdom government, And finally to the front lines to arm batches of new recruits or replace the worn-out equipment of veterans. Stimulated by the large number of orders, other territories in the Northwest Bay have also seen the emergence of Arda-style workshops, with profit driving people to actively seek any way to increase production. Weapon suppliers elsewhere were extremely envious, but there was nothing they could do. Weapons from the Northwest Bay were always the cheapest, given the same quality, so the kingdom's government always prioritized placing orders with Northwest industry. Under this pressure, weapon manufacturers elsewhere were forced to pursue a high-end strategy, abandoning the production of ordinary iron armor and focusing on plate armor, selling it to knights and generals of all ranks. Unlike ordinary iron armor, mainly made of wrought iron and issued to ordinary soldiers, plate armor was made of steel plates, and the time required was vastly different. A workshop with 26 people could produce nearly 1,600 sets of armor in 5 months, but a complete set of high-quality plate armor required nearly half a year of finishing. It was extremely time-consuming from start to finish, especially small parts like gloves, which needed to be individually hand-finished with very high tolerances, otherwise, it could cause inconvenience to the wearer. While the general skill level of Northwest Bay craftsmen couldn't produce such high-end goods with a surface so smooth it reflected a person's image, making them works of art in every aspect, they achieved a true monopoly in the low-end armor market. With the help of an expensive but guaranteed quality and quantity of arms, the kingdom has built a massive army, currently numbering over 70,000 against the rebels in the south, of which nearly 50,000 are ready for frontline combat. Catherine and her generals place great emphasis on the protection of their rank-and-file soldiers. The better the protection, the higher their survival rate. Veterans who have experienced life-or-death battles possess invaluable combat experience. Another group of generals is frustrated because such a powerful force should be able to crush the rebels swiftly, but the war is not progressing as smoothly as it should. Veblen's arrival is not the main reason. What truly troubles them is a mysterious legion within the rebel ranks, known among prisoners as the Undying Army. True to its name, this army always appears on the battlefield with exactly 6,000 men, no more, no less. Regardless of how many they lost in the previous battle, they always reappear with exactly 6,000 men, as if no one has died. Of course, no one believed they were truly immortal or capable of resurrection. What puzzled everyone was how the enemy could replenish their ranks so quickly, because the soldiers of this army were so extraordinary, immensely strong and fearless, far beyond what ordinary soldiers, munching on black bread and rarely eating meat, could be replaced by a few days of training. Even more outrageous, according to battlefield records, these guys behaved exceptionally brutally on the battlefield. Some soldiers even witnessed the horrific sight of them tearing apart the flesh of their enemies. They were practically a pack of beasts obeying orders. Fortunately, compared to this special unit, the other rebel units were not so terrifying. Only the elite troops wore iron armor, ordinary troops could only wear leather armor, and the newly recruited cannon fodder didn't even have any decent protective gear, a far cry from the kingdom's army, which was heavily equipped with iron armor. The so-called immortal army could only be attributed, after much thought, to the rebel wizards that had already spread throughout the camps. Chapter 388 The Stalemate in the South 2. The Restoration Army. This is the name Giles' rebel army gave themselves, originating from a small, separatist kingdom before the establishment of the Kingdom of Aldo. Giles' family could be somewhat related to the royal family of that kingdom. However, according to the current propaganda of the Restoration Army, this long-vanished royal family was more than just a local power. Giles believes his family has legitimate claims to the entire Kingdom of Aldo. The rebel camp was filled with noise and chaos, as is typical of armies of this era. On the outer perimeter, merchants hawked their wares, and heavily made-up prostitutes roamed around soliciting customers. Brawls, gambling, and drunkenness were commonplace. But in the center of the camp, however, security was tight, and an atmosphere of tension prevailed. Fully armed guards rigorously checked everyone entering and leaving, and anyone wandering around was immediately arrested. At the very center was a wooden fortress, the residence of the rebel commander-in-chief. At this moment, a banquet was being held inside the fortress. Grand Duke Giles has arrived. As the servant announced his name loudly, everyone in the hall immediately stopped talking and stood at attention. A man in a scarlet cloak, a sword at his waist, ascended to the head seat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his beard sculpted with an air of authority. Though his hair and beard were gray, his eyes were piercing, and his expression was stern and imposing. This was none other than Grand Duke Giles, the instigator of the Alder rebellion that had raged for years, a thorn in the side of the kingdom's government, and known as the Greedy Wolf. The Grand Duke faced the crowd, raised his hand slightly, and said, "Please be seated." He then sat down himself. The others followed suit and took their seats. Giles raised a glass of wine, his voice booming with extravagance. "Next week is the day of our decisive battle against the false king's army. Swords on the battlefield have no eyes. I hope everyone will be blessed by the Lord of Light, and that we can meet here again after the battle. Gentlemen, let's drink this first." The Grand Duke then tossed back his head and gulped down the entire glass of wine. A chorus of boisterous drinking filled the hall. "Your Highness has a remarkable capacity for alcohol," a fawning voice rang out. A man dressed in a distinctive manner stood up. He was different from the others, who were either in military uniform or simply dressed, wearing only a magnificent noble robe. He confidently declared, "Next week we'll definitely annihilate the false king's army, then swiftly march north and seize Jingaeo." Giles narrowed his eyes, smiling slightly, and said, "Haha, Sir Abel, with your confidence, we'll certainly conquer Jingaeo and control the entire country, if your Veblen family's army isn't so useless." If it weren't for their alliance, Giles would have loved to say the last sentence. The original plan was for the Restoration Army to advance from south to north, while the Veblen family's army would advance from east to west, preventing the royal army from supporting both sides. Reaching the gates of Jingaeo should have been a sure thing. However, they hadn't anticipated the Veblen family's army being so ineffective. Faced with the main force being moved south, leaving the eastern defenses weak, the royal army suffered repeated defeats. In the end, they even had the audacity to come to their side to pick up the scraps. Truly despicable. The one in charge of leading the troops was Veblen's youngest son, Sir Abel. From Abel alone, one could understand why the Veblen family's army was so weak. This libertine has been spending his days indulging in prostitutes and drinking since he arrived. He doesn't seem like a warrior at all, he's more like a tourist. His army is also a mess, incompetent in battle, but excellent at bullying the common people, a disgrace to warriors. It's a miracle this allied force doesn't cause trouble. During each battle, Giles always keeps them on the sidelines as reserves, essentially just cheering and adding fuel to the fire. After a few perfunctory words, Giles ignores Abel and turns to a young man to his right, saying, "Mr. Scott, we'll need your help in this battle." Scott stands up, clasps his hands on his chest, and bows. "Please rest assured, Your Excellency, a new batch of aid from the Mystic Society will arrive soon. Not only will they provide the undead army with secret medicine, but also a large quantity of armor and weapons. On the day of the decisive battle, our army's overall strength will undoubtedly reach a new level." The Grand Duke strokes his beard and nods slightly. However, a hint of worry lingers between his brows. General Samar, sitting to his left, noticed his lord's worry and asked, "Mr. Scott, could your organization provide more military supplies in the next few days? As you've seen, the armor coverage of the False King's army is far higher than ours. Relying solely on the limited number of undead soldiers, I'm afraid we won't be able to gain an absolute advantage." The Mage Scott hesitated, pondering for a moment before finally replying, "I will report to my superiors." Scott was also inwardly distressed. He had come with great ambition, hoping to achieve the legendary feat of wizards, to overthrow a powerful kingdom. However, halfway through the battle, the opposing kingdom's army suddenly saw a surge in combat power, mainly in terms of equipment. Almost every frontline soldier was armored, albeit only of average quality iron breastplates, far superior to the few elite troops on Giles' side who were armored. When did the Alder royal family become so wealthy? Did the nobles of Crystal Radiance suddenly realize the importance of sacrificing their wealth for the country? What a joke. Did those parasites have such high moral character? Even if the nobles were willing to donate money, where would the kingdom get so much iron to make weapons? They weren't using it anywhere else. Scott could sense that the organization's interest in Giles was waning. It seemed that his ability to carve out a territory was the limit. The Mystic Society's attention had shifted to Horn Bay, where they were about to stir up a storm, and Nathan had been sent there. How infuriating. Samar noticed Scott's perfunctory attitude, and a look of displeasure appeared on his face. To escape the awkwardness, Scott quickly changed the subject. "Have you found out where the False King's army's weapons come from?" Samar frowned deeply and said, "According to intelligence from the north, it seems they were all purchased from the Northwest Bay." Many people in the hall looked puzzled. Northwest Bay? What kind of remote place was that? They'd never even heard of it. Samar loudly explained to the crowd, it refers to the northwestern territories of the kingdom, named after the large bay there. In recent years, it seems a large, high-quality iron ore deposit has been discovered there, coupled with the kingdom's war, leading to a surge in arms production. A general slammed his fist on the table upon hearing this, exclaiming, "Damn it! Why does such good fortune always happen to the false king?" Scott asked, "Can't we try to win over the lords there?" Through your covert efforts, he did know about the Northwest Bay. A high-ranking member of the Mystic Society had gone there and hadn't been heard from since. A man in plain clothes, who appeared to be in charge of intelligence, shook his head and said, "Although the lords of the Northwest Bay have many disagreements, they are generally loyal to the royal family, and they are far from the southern border, so our influence is quite limited." While the crowd murmured amongst themselves, Grand Duke Giles waved his hand, and everyone fell silent. A cold glint flashed in greedy Wolf's eyes. Further words are useless. Focus on next week's battle. Those who owe us, those who schemed against us, I will settle accounts with them one by one. Fight, fight, his generals shouted in unison, their voices shaking the entire hall. Abel and Scott, intimidated by the Grand Duke's gaze, shivered involuntarily. Chapter 389 Hidden Worries in the Rear. Eileen stared at herself in the mirror, pouting slightly in dissatisfaction. "Isn't it ready yet?" A woman standing behind her, helping her with her hair and makeup, smiled and said, "Almost done, Your Highness." The woman chuckled inwardly. After traveling for so long, this little princess's spirit is still so carefree. Finally finished getting ready, Eileen cheerfully lifted her skirt and ran out. "Wait, Your Highness," a court lady guarding the door chased after her. Eileen arrived at the reception room of her bedchamber, where several girls of similar age were already waiting. "Your Highness," the girls stood up and bowed respectfully to Eileen. Eileen smiled and gestured for them to sit down. Several maids carrying trays came over and served tea and snacks to everyone. "Granny," Eileen turned to the court lady who had followed her and said, "We'd like to be alone for a while." She then made a pitiful face with her large eyes. The lady-in-waiting glared sternly at Eileen, but ultimately gave in. She sighed and said, "Girls, you are all from noble families, and you are not children anymore. You must always be mindful of your manners and behavior." After bowing, she slowly walked out of the reception room. Yay! Once the lady-in-waiting was out of sight, the girls burst into cheers. They no longer sat obediently in their seats, but swarmed onto Eileen's sofa. These were all noble girls who were usually on good terms with Eileen. Eileen, tell us more about the Northwest Bay." A petite girl with freckles tugged at Eileen's arm. "Tell us about Earl Gremmen's invention." Eileen had been back for some time, and her friends knew she had traveled to the north of the kingdom for a while. However, because of the good secrecy, they didn't know that Eileen had run away on her own. They all assumed she had gone incognito under the strict protection of the palace guards. "This," Eileen said somewhat awkwardly, "he's already explained everything. Even if Gleman is incredibly smart, he can't invent something every day." "Sigh," the freckled girl said disappointedly. "Haha, Anissa," another girl teased, "are you eyeing that count?" "Don't talk nonsense," the girl called. Anissa blushed instantly, and angrily tried to pull the other girl's mouth. Everyone laughed as the two chased and played around in the reception room. Eileen's experiences, which she shared with them, piqued everyone's interest. It turned out that the paper that had become popular in Crystal Radiance over the past 2 years came from the Northwest Bay, and the beautiful porcelain that the nobles coveted was also made there. It wasn't the legendary barbaric land. There were towns and villages where nobles and commoners lived, speaking an older language with a different accent from the residents of the capital. Moreover, there was a unique lord there who was working hard to improve the education of his people, teaching them to read and write and to understand reason. It was strange, didn't lords in small places usually think that the dumber their people were, the easier they were to govern? Amidst the laughter and chatter, Eileen instructed a servant to bring a book. She proudly placed it on the table, boasting, "My trip to the Northwest Bay wasn't just for fun, this is my culmination." The girls looked at the table. The cover read Basic Medical and Health Handbook. Anissa picked it up and opened it, her companions gathering around to read. "Wow! Amazing! No wonder Princess Eileen is known for her erudition." After a quick glance, they exclaimed in admiration. The book mainly introduced hygiene knowledge, such as frequent bathing, hand washing, eating cooked food, drinking boiled water, and how to sterilize wounds, ensuring proper ventilation when sick. and even precautions for women during childbirth. As nobles, many of the things mentioned in the book were habits they had developed from childhood, but even these familiar things were given a refreshing explanation in this book. It turned out that in places unseen by the human eye, there were countless tiny lives, the eggs of germs or parasites, and many diseases were caused by them. The various measures listed in the book could effectively prevent harm to the human body. They couldn't help but believe it. After returning, Eileen had a craftsman build a microscope based on the principles Paul had explained. The sight seen through the microscope terrified the girls. Eileen was a little embarrassed by her playmates' praise. Well, actually, it wasn't all my doing. It was co-authored with that corner-based scholar named Laddie. She's much more capable than me. And most of the measures listed in the book came from Paul Gleman. We just compiled them. Let us copy a copy too, Anissa requested on behalf of the girls. The little princess smiled mysteriously. Copy? That's too inefficient. Why? The girls asked, puzzled. Look at the words in the book. What are their characteristics? The girls frowned and began to observe. One of them said thoughtfully, these letters are so neat. Especially the identical letters and words. It's like they were all made from the same mold. Bingo, you guess it, Eileen explained. They are indeed made from the same mold. That's printing. There's a magical machine in the Northwest Bay, a printing press, that can mass-produce books without the laborious task of manual copying. Eileen, you said you've covered all of Paul Gleman's inventions. I've never even heard of this printing press, Anissa pouted, expressing her strong dissatisfaction. He only suggested the idea, and the final product, well, it's a collective invention, I guess. After brushing it off, Eileen announced, I've already sent someone to the Northwest Bay to order a printing press from Gleman. Once we return, we'll print this book, and not just you, everyone in Crystal Radiance will be able to see it. The little princess planned to promote good hygiene habits like drinking boiled water in Crystal Radiance, and as a member of the royal family, she considered it her duty. Of course, Eileen's plans didn't stop there. She also intended to replicate her great achievements in Northwest Bay at Crystal Radiance, such as establishing schools and building signal towers. Excuse me, Your Highness. While everyone was talking enthusiastically, a servant entered the reception room. What is it? Miss Anissa's family has arrived, saying they have important business with her. Let him in, soon. Another person dressed as a butler hurried in. It's you? What's the matter? Anissa recognized her butler. The butler said respectfully, Miss, the young master has returned and wants you to return home quickly. Is it my brother? Anissa's face lit up with joy. He's back. Anissa's brother had been stationed in West Harbor with Harrison Abbott and hadn't returned home for a long time. He is back, but, the butler said sadly, he has to rush back to his post. This trip back to the king was only to deliver a message, so he urgently needs you to come back and see him. Anissa then hurriedly bid farewell to Eileen. Eileen frowned and asked the butler, Anissa's brother's troops are stationed in Westport, right? Is the situation there still serious? Is it because of the pirates? The butler shook his head. My young master said that this trouble isn't caused by pirates, but it's related to the last pirate invasion. What was it? Goblins. Last time, the pirates secretly released a large number of goblins into the surrounding area while occupying Westport. These filthy creatures are very cunning. When the kingdom's army just recaptured Westport, they went into hiding, silently breeding in the forest. Now we don't know how many there are. Goblins. Eileen frowned. If these things aren't eradicated early on, they'll be very troublesome later. Ugh. Goblins, really? Why did the pirates bring such disgusting creatures? Several girls in the reception room exclaimed in surprise. It seemed they had also heard of these horrible creatures. There were also girls who hadn't heard of them, but after their companions gave them a lesson, they all cursed the goblins and the culprits, the pirates. After seeing Anissa off, Eileen looked towards the royal council chamber. Her father should be there now. Since Anissa's brother had returned with the news, the king must already know. She also knew that the main force of the kingdom's army in the south was facing a decisive battle with the rebels. And yet, troubles were brewing back home. Good luck, sister. Chapter 390 Technical Review Committee. Inside the iron cage, a small, thin figure huddled timidly in a corner, its hands covering its head, trembling as if gripped by immense fear. It was a humanoid creature, with hands and feet, though they looked withered and thin, and its ears were long and pointed. Incredible. In the courtyard of the Lord's Manor, Paul stared blankly at the creature in the cage. Tirpitz, who was leading the fleet in the south to help the kingdom defend against pirates, had sent him a gift, a creature called a goblin. For Paul, this was the first time he had ever witnessed a so-called fantasy creature, even though he already knew from others that dwarves, elves, and orcs existed in this world, and he had even personally experienced magical battles between mages, with a real witch standing beside him. Now, a life he had only seen in anime and his previous life had suddenly appeared before his eyes. Incredible. I thought they only existed in legends. Not only Paul, but other natives of the Northwest Bay were also marveling. After all, goblins had never appeared in the Northwest before. Hansel and Bernard, both from the capital, looked much more indifferent, perhaps inwardly thinking their colleagues were a bunch of country bumpkins. Then there was Lady Sisha, a naturalist with years of adventure experience. Goblins were no stranger to her, and many new adventurers started their journey by hunting goblins. Lord Griles, she said, her brow furrowing slightly, her tone serious, this creature may look wretched, but it's actually extremely dangerous. Don't let it escape. If it spreads into the nearby forest, the consequences will be unimaginable. Paul was puzzled. He looked at Laddie. I've heard of goblins' infamy, but there's only one here. How could it spread? Yes, Laddie maintained her serious expression. There have been several such cases in history. Scholars speculate that goblins may have the ability to reproduce asexually. Paul was speechless. Goblins were supposed to be higher beings. Could they really reproduce like Paramecia? All right. Philip, Paul called out. Lord Griles, you called me. The old butler appeared quickly in the courtyard. Paul pointed at the goblin in the cage. Kill this thing and feed it to the dogs later. Although it was a gift from Tirpitz, the letter mentioned that it should be disposed of immediately after the novelty wore off, so there was no need to worry about it. Yes, Lord Griles, the old butler replied. If the legend was true, this creature was incredibly resilient. Paul didn't dare to just dig a hole and bury it. What if it grew back from the ground? After all, in some magical universe, there were also a bunch of green-skinned creatures whose dandruff could grow into offspring. And this was a magical world where magic existed, so it was better to be cautious. The little thing in the cage seemed to sense its tragic name and suddenly burst into tears. Paul remained unmoved, waving his hand to have the creature carried out. If only it were an elf lady in the cage. As for the goblin? Forget it. The novelty was over, it was time to get down to business. Gentlemen, I've gathered you here today to review which technologies can be promoted internationally, Paul announced, leading the group to their seats in the hall. To be honest, Lord Gleman, I don't approve of teaching our technologies to others. Canning, porcelain, salt production, and paper-making are major sources of our revenue. Why let others take a share? The intelligence chief, Cecil, shook his head, expressing his opposition. Paul explained, Cecil, this is how I see it. The principles behind our existing technologies aren't complex, it's only a matter of time before outsiders can replicate them. Over the past few years, we've invested a lot of manpower and resources to keep these technologies secret, sending people to every factory to guard them closely. However, as more and more private factories use these technologies, continuing to keep them secret is unrealistic. The strict scrutiny has also significantly hampered production capacity. It's better to open them up sooner rather than later. Of course, this opening is conditional. Outsiders must join our patent protection system and obtain our authorization before they can use these technologies. Conversely, if outsiders have any good technologies, we must also obtain their authorization to use them. I agree with your opinion, Lord Gleman, the female advisor, Laddie, suggested. Perhaps you could take the lead in establishing a patent protection alliance as a pilot practice for the customs union. This wouldn't directly affect the interests of the rural landowners, so they naturally have no reason to object. Starting from this point, we can gradually open up the situation, and we can also gain some experience in the operation of the alliance. A patent protection alliance? Good idea, Paul said, very interested. Actually, one of the reasons I support opening up technology is to stimulate the development of surrounding territories. Only when everyone's economy is active can we hope to reduce tariffs. Otherwise, it's not enough for only us to prosper, they will only close their doors tighter. In addition, we will attract less jealousy. After some discussion, most people, including Old Ford and Hansel, agreed with Paul's decision. Cecil also did not object, although as the head of intelligence, he still had many doubts. Paul stroked his chin and said, This needs to be acted upon immediately. Myron, his ally sitting next to him, turned around. Although Myron Gardner was usually not very talkative in meetings, Paul would always call on him when discussing important matters. The Gardner family has good relations with the lords of the Northwest Bay. How about you talk to them this time? Okay, leave it to me, Myron readily agreed. However, you'd better think carefully about which technologies you can give to others and which you can't. Of course, I'm not stupid. I can't just hand over cannon manufacturing technology to someone else, can I? That's the second reason I called everyone here today. I've decided to establish a technology review committee to specifically review all the technologies we control, taking into account all aspects, especially security, to determine whether certain technologies can be licensed to others. Grayman is wise. Please allow me to contribute to this committee. Hansel took the lead in flattering Paul. This guy never spared any effort to strengthen his presence in the State Council. Chapter 391 Halsin and his nephew. As the sun began to set, a magnificent carriage slowly entered Lake Town from the south, traveling north along the main street that formed the city's central axis, before crossing a stone bridge to an island in the northern part of the lake. To be precise, only the area on this island truly constituted Lake Town. 3 years ago, large swathes of the southern shore of Lake Vis were farmland or forest. Now, they had been replaced by numerous buildings and streets. A constant influx of immigrants and newly built factories were rapidly expanding the town's area. The council had proposed renaming this emerging city, while Lake Town on the island would continue to be used as a district name. However, Paul hesitated among the various naming options, and the new name for the city remained undecided. Because this small island was the site of the Gleman family's ancestral castle, and the offices of the council and various military departments were built around it, the island had become the power center of the three powerful territories of Arda, Byron, and Emden. The three powerful territories. Emden was already a strong territory, located in the Northwest Bay, of course, while Arda and Barden's development in recent years demonstrated their growing strength to the surrounding areas. Thanks to the ever-expanding telegraph lines, Lakahur Town sent out the latest instructions to each territory daily, and received a constant stream of feedback from them. It was precisely because of the island's special status that it became a place where dignitaries vied to move in. Who wouldn't want to be closer to the center of power? Besides higher-ranking officials from various military and political departments, there were also newly rising factory owners and merchants who, even if they didn't reside permanently in Lakahur Town, sought a foothold here. Of course, there were also the Emden nobles and lords who had sworn allegiance to the Gleman family, who flocked here to purchase property. Driven by these people, land prices on the island skyrocketed. Although the natives were mostly commoners, many even technically serfs under the Gleman family, everyone knew that Earl Gleman prided himself on being a protector of the common people, so no one dared to seize or forcibly buy land under his nose. The natives took this opportunity to make a fortune, happily moving to the new town on the south bank with their money bags. The carriage continued slowly, turning into a wide alley, and finally stopped in front of a mansion of moderate size. An old man and a young man were already waiting at the door. After the carriage door opened, the young man stepped forward and respectfully greeted, "Uncle, Orlando." The person inside the carriage responded, then stepped down. This was a tall, slender middle-aged man with a neatly trimmed beard and well-maintained skin. He was clearly wealthy and noble. Viscount Eugene Halsin, the lord of one of Emden's vassal states, had arrived in Lake Town after more than 2 days of travel. Former vassals of the Kent family were now vassals of the Gleman family, at least nominally. The young man standing at the door to greet him was his nephew, Orlando Halsin, with a steward of the Lakeshire Manor appointed by Halsin standing beside him. Eugene Halsin's wife died after giving birth to 3 daughters, and the Viscount, deeply saddened by her passing, never remarried, thus designating his brother's son as heir. He placed high hopes on this nephew, and shortly after swearing allegiance to Paul Gleman on behalf of the family, he sent him to Lakeshire for his education. Sending the family heir to be educated by their lord was a common way for vassals to demonstrate loyalty in this era. However, Lakeshire had no knights to teach Orlando martial arts, nor noblewomen to instruct him in etiquette. His education was limited to 2 avenues, the Wise Academy, which imparted cultural knowledge, and the Gleman Military Academy, which taught military skills. Viscount Halsin chose Wise Academy for his nephew. As a nobleman's son who received an excellent education from a young age, Orlando didn't need to start from primary school, He passed the secondary school entrance exam with ease, and even if he lacked the novel knowledge taught in primary school, he could easily master it through auditing classes or night school. The uncle and nephew entered the mansion, where a sumptuous dinner had been prepared. The two ate and talked. "What brings you to Lakeside Town this time?" "I'm here to purchase a batch of agricultural machinery, and also to see which of the technologies His Excellency the Earl is going to reveal can be used by us." The Viscount swirled a glass of red wine slightly. "Orlando, you've been living in Lakeside Town for a while now. What do you think of it?" The young man chewed the meat in his mouth, swallowed it quickly, and said, "Well, it's a very vibrant place, very vibrant." Yes, Earl Giles seems to have instilled in everyone here the concept that as long as you work hard, you'll be rewarded. You might not believe it, but in Lakeside Town, even the corvée labor that lords usually use hasn't appeared for a long time. Instead, it's all about hiring. Earl Giles will also summon his people to work, but he'll pay them wages. "Oh?" Viscount Helson raised an eyebrow. "Very novel," he asked. "So, what do you think of the Academy?" Orlando thought for a moment and replied, "Unlike other places that emphasize literature, art, and etiquette, this place focuses more on practicality. Mathematics is of paramount importance. Much of the curriculum was personally compiled by Lord Gleman. I have indeed learned a lot of novel but efficient theories here. I heard that the Earl is working on a profound textbook called Advanced Mathematics, but I wonder when it will be published. The Academy also has alchemy. We call it chemistry here. It's strange, alchemy has always been passed down in small-scale apprenticeships. I've never seen such large-scale teaching as at Weiss Academy." "You must study hard, study hard." Viscount Helson squinted and nodded repeatedly. It seemed that his new lord wanted practical technical talents. "I've always wanted to ask you a question." Orlando looked at his uncle. "What is it?" "I know you sent me here to study so that the family could gain a foothold in the new system." The Viscount did not deny his nephew's statement. "Then why not let me directly take the civil service exam? Those peasants who barely know a few words can pass, so I'll have no problem. Although it's a bit beneath me to compete with them as the heir to Viscountship, I'm confident I can quickly secure an important position. In other territories, a noble's son like Orlando only needs a letter of recommendation from his family to obtain any official position. But in Alda, it's different. You have to take an exam." "Orlando," the Viscount explained, "from my observation, the Earl must have been forced to recruit these mediocre people into his administrative system. You know, in this day and age, how many people can actually read an entire article? In the Academy, do you think Lord Gleman values you students very much? He personally oversees every exam." "That's right. The current government exams are just a temporary measure. Those who get in will eventually hit a ceiling on promotion. The students of the West Academy are the Earl's future pillars. If you don't have that status, even if you get into the government and perform exceptionally well, you'll be overshadowed." "I understand," Orlando nodded. Actually what? I'm considering transferring to that military academy." At this, the young man's eyes shone with longing. He had watched the Alda army drill from afar. The neat formations, the synchronized movements, and the flamboyant marching were truly breathtaking. Sigh. The Viscount smiled slightly and shook his head. He had been young once too, and knew this young man was full of thoughts about riding horses and fighting. If there's a war, the army is naturally the easiest place to achieve results. But the Earl isn't a warmonger. He only fought the pirates, the Barden Rebellion, and the War of the Usurpers when he had no other choice. Do you want to slowly build up your seniority in the army? Besides, it's not a good thing for us to have a warmongering lord, like Maltz Kent. And our status as surrendered people is a bit awkward. Don't touch the Earl's sword hilt carelessly." All right," the young man nodded dejectedly. "Actually, I was just saying. You know, it's quite difficult for me to get into Giles Academy." "What do you mean?" Viscount Helson was puzzled. Given his nephew's excellence, why would he say something like that? The admissions process at the Gleman Military Academy seems, no, it definitely favors commoners. While there's no strict rule, based on our observations, it seems that less than a quarter of the students from upper-class families get in. And this upper-class family isn't just the legitimate nobles like us, it also includes wealthy landowning families from the countryside. "Oh? Is that so?" Viscount Helson was quite surprised. "Yes, many of the children from upper-class families at our academy are quite resentful and frequently clash with neighboring academies. There are quite a few instances of them fighting in private. Uncle, Orlando saw his uncle lost in thought. Hearing his nephew call out, the Viscount snapped out of his reverie. Orlando, you haven't participated, have you? The young man hesitated for a moment, then stammered, just a few times. In other places, a commoner fighting with a powerful noble family with land holdings usually ends badly, but Orlando was facing his lord student, Paul, who was simultaneously the principal of both the Gleman Military Academy and the Weiss Academy. Listen, in the future, if you encounter something like this, don't get involved. Stay away, the Viscount solemnly warned his nephew. Yes, Orlando was somewhat surprised to notice the expression on his uncle's face. Eugene Helson stared at him. Although I don't know what the Earl's intentions are, we shouldn't interfere in things we shouldn't. You are the heir of our family, and I don't want anything to happen to you. I understand, Uncle, Orlando nodded emphatically. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 392 The Final Battle. Kill. On the Furor Plains in the south of the Kingdom of Waldo, two armies clashed fiercely, their shouts shaking the heavens. Princess Catherine's kingdom army was engaged in a final battle against the rebel army led by Grand Duke Giles. On a high hill, Catherine, fully armored and riding a white horse, watched the battlefield intently, her lower lip clenched. Beside her were high-ranking generals of the kingdom army, including Offina, Lester, and Walker, but two generals, Duke Dodge and Sir Klein, were not with her. These two, commanders of the left and right flanks respectively, were not among them. The fighting had raged since dawn, with both sides suffering casualties, seemingly evenly matched. Duke Walker glanced at the princess, hesitant to speak. The troops he had brought from his own territory were now being rotated into battle, and this was already the second round of fighting. The casualties were heavy, and many of his own family members had been seriously wounded while commanding the troops. The Duke was deeply distressed. Your Highness, the Duke, having made up his mind, suggested to Catherine, shouldn't we use that now? Let's go all out. The so-called that was the kingdom's army, or rather, the royal family's secret weapon, Hellfire. In the Duke's view, the name Hellfire was truly apt. It couldn't be extinguished by water, and this terrifying flame must truly come from hell. But even for Duke Walker, he had only learned of the existence of this terrifying weapon this year. After the city guards rebelled and occupied Crystal Radiance, he promptly rose up to defend the king, and when the princess formed a southward army to quell the rebellion, he once again answered the call. Duke Walker's loyalty earned him the royal family's approval, thus entering the core power circle of the kingdom's army, and thus learning about this secret weapon that the royal family had kept hidden all along. Now is not the time. Catherine rejected the Duke's suggestion without hesitation. Duke Walker nodded slightly and said nothing more. He understood the princess's concerns. Although Hellfire was powerful, its quantity was extremely limited, ultimately because the royal family could not manufacture such a thing themselves. Its origin seemed to be related to those mysterious pointed ears. Clearly, His Highness was not yet ready to reveal his trump card. The Hellfire troops had only recently arrived, almost missing the final battle. Your Highness. The undead army is moving, the general stirred, pointing at the battlefield ahead. Behind the rebels, a force with equipment distinctly different from the others, marching in perfect unison, was slowly approaching the front lines. Catherine gazed at the undead army from afar and called out, Lester. Yes, Lester replied, then quickly rode away from the high ground. About an hour later, the two armies, carrying the hopes of victory for both sides, clashed head-on in the center of the battlefield. One was the kingdom's mysterious force wielding strange weapons, the other was the rebel undead army, whose size was always only 6,000. Is that the tactic Catherine used to counter the undead army? As reported in the intelligence, the rebel high command, including Giles, looked on in surprise. Because the enemy forces facing the undead army appeared to be a lightly armed force, unlike the kingdom's soldiers who were generally equipped with metal armor. They only had simple protection. After observing for a while, Samar beside Giles shouted, not good. He recalled the terrifying experience of the first attack on Thorn Fortress. Lord Giles, it's Hellfire. I guess it's the Hellfire we encountered before. Giles was startled. He had heard Samar describe this terrifying weapon, almost like magic, indestructible in water. However, This weapon had only appeared once, and the Restoration Army had never encountered it again in subsequent battles. Therefore, he judged that the kingdom's army must have very few hellfires, and the stalemate at Fuger further convinced him that the kingdom's army had run out of hellfires. Such a protracted stalemate between the two armies was a huge drain on national strength, and Catherine was a decisive woman. She wouldn't leave such a good weapon unused. Unexpectedly, they encountered each other during the final battle. However, after the initial panic, Giles quickly regained his composure. He grinned menacingly and said to his general, "Samar, let's make a bet." Samar was puzzled. "What?" "Your Highness, let's bet on how much hellfire Catherine has." The Grand Duke's eyes now resembled those of a gambler. Samar was shocked. You're not planning to withdraw the troops? Even though they are only, we can't just throw them away." Giles waved his hand, interrupting Samar, and said coldly, "War is a gamble. And they were planned to be sacrificed." So the two armies drew closer, eventually coming to within about 10 meters of each other. "Ready!" With a shout from Commander Lester, the kingdom's army stopped in unison. The undead army opposite also slowed their pace, leveling their spears, ready to assassinate. "Spray!" Lester ordered again, and a spectacular scene unfolded on the battlefield. Strange weapons wielded by the kingdom's soldiers unleashed jets of fire that swept towards the undead army. Instantly, soldiers in the undead ranks were ignited, their cries of agony from the intense flames echoing through the air. The ranks of the undead soldiers at the rear immediately crumbled, scattering in panic under the onslaught of the fire dragons. Only the first rank of undead soldiers, howling in agony, gripped their weapons tightly, charging forward with ferocious expressions, their bodies wreathed in flames like demons from hell. "Spray. Second rank, keep spraying." Lester seemed surprised that anyone could still charge forward under such a terrifying attack. The soldiers who had finished spraying immediately retreated, while the second rank rushed to the front, raising their weapons and spraying. The fire dragon struck again, throwing the rebel ranks into further chaos. Soldiers barely maintaining their formation were ignited, frantically striking their bodies or rolling on the ground, unable to extinguish the terrifying flames. The first rank of undead soldiers, charging towards the kingdom's army, too succumbed to their bodies' primal instincts, collapsing as their limbs convulsed and were consumed by the flames, inflicting only minor casualties. The kingdom's army continued to spew fire until the undead were either annihilated or fled in despair. "The undead have fallen, long live Alder, long live Catherine." Other units engaged in fierce combat witnessed this scene. The undead, once invincible in battle, had been wiped out in such a short time. The kingdom's morale soared, their fighting becoming even more ferocious. While the rebels' morale plummeted, the battle seemed to have taken a turn for the better. Catherine and the others watching from the high ground finally smiled. The scales of victory had tipped in their favor. "Your Highness, now is the perfect opportunity," Ophina suggested. "Let's seize the moment and unleash our reserves to rout their center, then split their flanks and eliminate them one by one." "Good," Catherine agreed, immediately preparing to issue the order. "What unit is that?" Duke Walker suddenly exclaimed. People looked in the direction he was pointing, and saw a unit changing equipment behind the rebels. No, the undead. When they could see clearly, everyone was stunned. The unit, now equipped exactly like the undead they had just wiped out, numbered over 10,000. "How is this possible? Weren't they already wiped out?" someone asked incredulously. "We've made a huge mistake." Catherine lashed her whip angrily, gritting her teeth as she said, "Who said the undead army only has 6,000 men? That's just the impression Giles has been giving us." She suddenly recalled the reaction of the undead army under the Hellfire attack earlier. Only the soldiers at the front charged forward in certain death, while the rest fled in terror. Perhaps, that undead army at the front was just bait? Only a few soldiers were real. Catherine decisively ordered, "Send word to Duke Dodge and Klein to gather the left and right flanks and move towards the center." "Yes, sir." Two knights spurred their horses and galloped off, one to the east and one to the west. On a high-riding wagon belonging to the rebels, a man in a gray robe gazed at the kingdom's army. His eyes gleamed with an eerie light, his pupils appearing unfocused to others. Hell, he let out a strange laugh, then closed his eyes. A moment later, the gray-robed man opened his eyes again and shouted to Giles and the others below, "Your Highness, most of the fire-breathing troops have switched to ordinary weapons. Only a few hundred are still wielding those weapons." He'd made the right bet. Giles clenched his fist, and the generals around him breathed a sigh of relief. Catherine, you didn't expect that the initial undead army was just a fake," did you? And you certainly didn't expect the undead army to have expanded to over 10,000 before the final battle, did you? I sacrificed quite a few to let you reveal your trump card first, although your trump card exceeded my expectations. Ha ha ha, Giles laughed happily. Although the appearance of the Hellfire had caused some changes to the plan, it hadn't deviated from the overall direction. He turned to Scott beside him and said, "Thank you all for your timely support." Scott nodded slightly. "I congratulate you on your victory in advance, Lord Giles. The False King's army is closing in on the center." Grand Duke Greedwolf immediately stopped smiling. Now was not the time to laugh. He had only escaped an unexpected crisis caused by Hellfire, but his central army had indeed suffered a major defeat, with over 6,000 men broken through, creating a large gap. "Gather our troops as well. Hold off the False King's army until the undead have re-equipped, then rush in and deliver a fatal blow." Morale had been dampened by the defeat of the fake undead. No problem, once the real undead charged in, they would quickly replenish the ranks. Taking advantage of the kingdom's army's wavering morale due to the reappearance of the undead, the rebels broke off contact and began to form a large square formation. However, something unexpected happened to Giles. "Your Highness, the Veblen army has launched a reckless charge against the enemy." "What? Bring them back immediately, Your Highness, it's terrible. The Veblen army has been defeated." "What? How long has it been?" The Veblen army, which had charged without authorization, was routed, a royal cavalry unit hot on their heels, hacking and slashing. The fleeing soldiers instinctively ran towards their allies who were regrouping, hoping for protection. "We can't let them break through our lines. Send the order, kill any fleeing soldiers who dare to charge." Giles's beard was practically twisted with rage. But it was too late. If it were the enemy charging, his troops could still organize a defense, but with a large, disorganized group of allies retreating, the soldiers who hadn't yet received the kill order could only give them a path. As a result, the rebel army, already terrified by the Hellfire, became even more chaotic, and the morale of the rebel soldiers plummeted once more. Long live Walder, with the Veblen army leading the way. Lester, leading the cavalry in pursuit of the Veblen forces, shouted, raising his lance and charging into the rebel ranks. His heavily armed knights immediately followed. "Veblen! I swear I'll wring your head off," Giles roared, watching the chaotic formation crumble. In the distance, the kingdom's army, now fully assembled, was closing in. Chapter 393 A Bitter Victory. Cecil, clutching a stack of papers, hurried out of his intelligence department and arrived at the Lord's Manor. He straightened his collar at the entrance and went straight in. No one stopped him. As the Lord's third eye, Cecil had the privilege of seeing Paul without prior notice. After asking a servant for Paul's location, Cecil quickly went to a door on the second floor and knocked. "Lord Giles, I have important matters to report to you." "Ah, Cecil, please come in," came Paul's voice from inside. Cecil pushed open the door and found that besides the Earl, there were two unexpected people inside, the alchemists from the chemistry laboratory, Wells and Old Hoffman. These two alchemists, along with a group of their colleagues and students, were rarely seen, and few people sought them out. After all, anyone would keep their distance from a group of people who spent their days in the stinking saltwater resistance fields dealing with excrement. They had come to report to Paul on the progress of the saltwater resistance field experiments. Paul frowned deeply as he looked at the report in his hand. "Guys," the Lord's tone betrayed doubt and dissatisfaction. "If I'm not mistaken, no, I mean, the saltpeter production shouldn't be this low." Based on my estimation, the alchemists had finally managed to produce some results, but Paul was still very dissatisfied. "If I'm not mistaken? The Earl has dealt with these so-called saltpeter fields before?" A question flashed through the minds of the two alchemists. "Oh, cough. Lord Giles," Old Hoffman explained, "I'm sorry, we haven't fully grasped the patterns yet. Please give us some more time." Wells, standing to the side, also complained, "Temperature, humidity, ventilation, light, there are too many variables. We need to adjust them little by little to accumulate experience." Paul raised his hand to interrupt them. "All right, you parameter adjusters. I didn't call you here to listen to complaints." The nickname the Earl had given the alchemists made Cecil, who was standing at the door, chuckle, and the two alchemists blushed. "Leaving aside the saltpeter field matter for now, I recently heard that the chemistry lab purchased a large quantity of glassware and experimental materials. Where did you get the money? Did you embezzle funds from the saltpeter field research fund?" This, Lord Gleman, We are, you see, so many students who have never touched alchemy before, so, we need to let them practice more." Seeing the two alchemists stammering, Paul chuckled inwardly, but warned them sternly, "Listen, you two, outside of your main tasks, I don't object to you doing other research in your spare time, perhaps you'll come up with something. However, if you need money, you can report to me, but embezzling special funds is strictly prohibited from happening again." Paul's investigation revealed that the embezzled funds had indeed not been used for the alchemists' personal lives. Given their enthusiasm for scientific exploration, he let them off this time. Old Hoffman and Wells were overjoyed, swearing to strictly abide by the rules Paul had set. "All right, you two, you may return now. Hopefully, within a year, the saltpeter field will allow us to reduce our dependence on ore. Please rest assured, Lord Griles, now that we have achieved something from scratch, optimizing it should not be difficult." The two alchemists took their leave. Paul then turned to Cecil. "My chief of intelligence, what's the important matter?" Cecil stepped forward. "Lord Gleman, I just received news that the war in the south is over." "Oh? Who won? The Royal Army? Or the rebels?" Cecil stroked his chin and said, "I'd say the Royal Army won." Paul was puzzled by his chief of intelligence's account. "I'd say, what does that mean?" Cecil explained. "Gals has resumed his allegiance to the royal family." Paul asked, "Then, what about those southern territories that were loyal to the royal family before the rebellion? Did Giles return them?" Cecil shook his head. "Neither side mentioned it." Paul guessed. "It seems the royal family tacitly approved Giles' annexation of these territories." "Yes, both sides suffered heavy losses. Even if the royal army won, it's unable to advance south. This is a very embarrassing victory for the royal family." "What about Grand Duke Veblen of the East? He, like Giles, has returned to submission to the royal family. However, those territories in the east that were loyal to the royal family have also. Veblen probably dealt with them too, since the main force of the royal army was tied down in the south. It seems the royal family has effectively lost influence over the south and east. From now on, these two places will become Giles and Veblen's private little kingdoms." Paul and Cecil made this judgment together. With the war in the south over, business in the northwest industries won't be so good." Paul was somewhat worried. "Lord Gleman, there will never be a shortage of war in this world, you can rest assured." Had he completely taken on the role of an arms dealer? What a sin. "Your Highness, we should go." Offina walked to the princess's side and gently reminded her. The two were standing on the majestic tower of Thorn Fortress, gazing at the southern lands. Catherine remained silent. Would the kingdom ultimately lose its rule over the south? Giles ceased his rebellion. His initial slogan was to replace the kingdom of Alder, but he had now reverted to submission. In that respect, the suppression of the rebellion was a victory. However, it was a bitter victory. The southern border previously held not only Giles and his followers, but also a considerable number of loyal vassal families. Now, their territories were all in the hands of Giles and his cronies. If these vassals had remained loyal to the kingdom, it would have been fine, but unfortunately, after the ceasefire, Giles had politely handed them over. How to settle these nobles who had lost their lands was another major problem. And then there was Veblen in the east. After the final battle, Catherine had intended to grit her teeth and persevere, but the enormous losses and instability at home ultimately led her to accept peace talks. News came from Crystal Radiance that large numbers of goblins were appearing in the forests, requiring the army to exterminate them. Furthermore, there were sporadic reports of pirate attacks on the west coast. Although the Northwestern Fleet, which had marched south to defend the king, had performed admirably, it only had a dozen or so ships. How could they possibly defend such a long coastline? "Alice," the princess sighed. "Offina, let's go." "But I swear." Giles, his eyes bloodshot, roared and knocked the person in front of him to the ground. Then, he raised his greatsword and was about to strike. "Grand Duke, spare me," the fallen man hurriedly begged for mercy. The war was over, but the result was far from what Giles had hoped for. Generations of his family's accumulation and his years of scheming had only resulted in a regional power. He should have been riding a tall horse through the streets of Crystal Radiance, receiving cheers from the people. He should have been sitting in the Crystal Radiance Palace, receiving homage from his ministers. Now, he could only vent his anger in the dueling arena. "Get out," Giles stopped. "Thank you for sparing my life, Grand Duke." The man who had been captured as a dueling opponent fled in panic. Giles wiped his sweat and then cursed those who had prevented him from fulfilling his wishes. Damn Veblen, without this ally who was dragging him down, the final battle should have been a great victory. Damn those Northwesterners, the Northwest Elf was also on the Grand Duke's blacklist. If it weren't for the large quantities of armor and weapons they sold to the royal family, his powerfully reinforced army would have been unstoppable long ago. Moreover, intelligence indicated that the Northwest Elf had supplied large quantities of military rations during the war. I will deal with you one by one, I swear. Chapter 394. A new play unfolds. News of the suppression of the Southern Rebellion spread rapidly throughout Alder. The royal government announced a major victory, and both Giles and Veblen, the two rebels, remained silent. On the surface, the kingdom of Alder seemed to have returned to its former peace, and the rule of the Rodney dynasty remained as solid as a rock. However, some with ulterior motives discovered that while the royal family had won on the surface, it had suffered considerable losses behind the scenes. His Majesty's government began to shift its attention to controlling the goblin infestation on the west coast, a scourge left behind by pirate invasions. Meanwhile, news of the end of the Alder Civil War spread further and further, reaching other parts of the continent. In Nisburg, the capital of the Horn Bay Alliance, unlike the further north in Alder where snow had already begun to fall, a light drizzle was falling. A carriage slowly traveled along a path in the forest outside Nisburg. 2 years ago, this forest had been ravaged by wolves attacking humans, causing widespread fear among travelers. Later, the city hall organized the city guards and adventurers to conduct a large-scale extermination operation in the suburbs, restoring normal traffic. Having traveled some distance from Nijmsburg, the carriage turned onto a side road and stopped in front of a secluded manor. The door opened, and Edward stretched his leg onto the cobblestones of the manor entrance. Damn weather. It's been raining for days, he grumbled, looking at the gloomy sky. He pulled his cloak hood tighter, then went to the gate and pounded on it. Who is it? A small window in the door opened, revealing a pair of wary eyes. Edward remained silent, simply handing over a wooden plaque. A moment later, the manor gate opened. He pulled his cloak tighter, walked along a cobblestone path through the courtyard, and entered the manor house. He removed his cloak and handed it to the welcoming servant, tidied his hair, and went into the card room on the second floor. 2 people were already waiting inside, a young mage named Nathan, idly fiddling with a deck of cards, and a woman in casual clothes, standing by the window watching the pouring rain. Edward gave Nathan a slight nod in acknowledgement, which Nathan acknowledged without looking up, continuing to fiddle with his cards. Edward didn't mind, having known the young man for so long, he understood his temperament. Besides, there was another person in the room closely connected to Nathan. Edward bowed respectfully to the woman standing by the window, though she couldn't see his gesture. My lord, definite news has arrived from Scott. The civil war in Alder's over. Civil war. The woman turned, revealing a beautiful face. Though she looked young, her expression held a touch of world weariness, a maturity beyond her years. Yes, civil war. Giles and Veblen have rejoined the royal family, Edward explained. Haha, Nathan chuckled, fiddling with his cards. So Scott and his cronies wasted their time? No, Edward shook his head. While the Alder royal family won in appearances, they lost in substance. The families in the south and east that were originally loyal to the king have been eradicated by Giles and Veblen respectively. These 2 regions are effectively out of the royal family's control. Looking at it this way, our plan is 90% successful. In terms of actual effect, it's 100%. After all this turmoil, the Alder kingdom is no longer able to interfere in external affairs. Nathan tossed aside his cards, stroking his chin. HMPH, the Alder royal family should be glad. They should have lost even more. If Master Barnett's plan in the Northwest Bay had succeeded, it wouldn't just be the south and east that were out of the royal family's control, then they overdid it. The woman by the window suddenly interjected. Mom. Yes, sir. Nathan and Edward stopped their discussion. The woman spoke with a hint of admonition. Remember, our goal isn't to create chaos. Alder has lost its power, just the right amount is enough. Edward lowered his head, appearing to accept her instruction. Even if he disagreed, he dared not show it on his face. After all, she was one of the 10 highest members of the Mystic Order. After he led the invasion of Alder's Westport, this woman had sternly warned him against direct confrontation with Alder's military forces, primarily the Loyalist fleet sent from the Northwest Bay after the Westport fleet's destruction. and only against harassment with small forces. The reason given was the earlier warning against overexertion. However, judging from the current outcome, her advice was correct. What if they had harassed the kingdom's rear too aggressively, and Giles had reached crystal radiance? The Mystic Order's goal was never to support Giles in unifying Alder, but to create a divided Alder, preventing the various forces from uniting. Nathan chuckled, perhaps Giles is resenting us for not providing enough support? His initial dream was to wear the crown, not just to carve out a territory. The woman smiled dismissively. Hate yourself for being incompetent. A crown won with the help of others is a heavy burden, even if you wear it, she then added. All right, from now on, let's not interfere in Aldo's affairs, especially in the Northwest. Well, that's settled then. A hint of excitement appeared on Nathan's face. Haha, the new show is about to begin. The woman sighed. Why did I give birth to such a troublemaking son? Nathan walked to the window, looking at the hazy forest in the distance. Nesta has surrendered, although is preoccupied with its own problems. Next, we need to tie down the papacy's power at Horn Bay, and then His Highness the Prince's grand plan can truly be implemented. Edward stood behind him, his eyes filled with anticipation for the future. Then we can walk openly among the people. The three were silent for a moment, then the woman suddenly asked, have you made contact with those who escaped? Nathan replied, we've made contact, but many of them seem hesitant. A look of reminiscence crossed the woman's face. Leaving the place you've lived for so long is indeed a difficult decision, Nathan scoffed. A bunch of short-sighted people. His mother glared at him. Don't laugh at our compatriots. And we have a responsibility to put them in such a dangerous situation. Nathan fell silent, then muttered softly, it's all for the greater good. Necessary sacrifices have to be made. His mother shook her head and turned back to face the window. Let's try our best to bring them to our side. The rain outside began to pour. Chapter 395 The Witch's Assistant. In the port district of Nejbsburg, Friedrich List stood satisfied in front of a two-story building, carefully examining it. This would soon be his workplace and home. After a series of clanging sounds, a bilingual plaque in both Aldo and Horn Bay languages was securely hung above the main entrance. Todd Shipping. After readily paying the construction workers, List breathed a sigh of relief. The office his boss had entrusted him to establish was finally settled. He would now be the shipping company's representative in Horn Bay. Although he wouldn't be able to return to the Northwest Bay for a long time, it was still a promotion. The office needed to constantly monitor the local market. Todd Shipping's merchant ships, laden with goods, would arrive in Horn Bay laden with cargo and, naturally, wouldn't return empty-handed. The office would then be needed to find business opportunities transporting goods from the south to the north, or to purchase profitable goods to take back. As economic and trade relations between the two regions deepened, he believed that more and more offices established by Northwest Bay merchants would appear in Horn Bay. Just as he was envisioning the future, a rag flew out of the second-floor window and landed squarely on his face. A beautiful face then appeared, but as beautiful as it was, the expression on her face was as if Lister owed her 8 million. Weren't you supposed to be cleaning? Why are you slacking off downstairs? Lister smiled wryly, removing the rag from his face and hurriedly said, coming, I'll help you right away, HMPH. As if it's my business, haha, sorry. The woman's name was Sevia Stinney, Lister's newly hired assistant, but she also had another identity, a witch in hiding. It was she who, over a month ago, openly declared war on the church near the Nisburg Cathedral, causing quite a stir and severely damaging the church's reputation. However, her true purpose was to lure out the church's armed guard so another group could infiltrate and rescue the imprisoned wizard, and she succeeded, truly slapping the church in the face. Whether out of overconfidence or a death wish, she fainted after the deed was done. Fortunately, she was well hidden, and the church's armed personnel rushed back to her aid after discovering the prison break, thus saving her life. She was then found and picked up by Lister, who had been watching the scene with trepidation. It wasn't about the antidote, so many days had passed, and he was perfectly fine. Lister guessed the witch had been bluffing him. However, perhaps because of that intimate encounter that night, Lister felt he couldn't leave this woman to die. Some unseen force compelled him. Luckily, he had recently rented a place to stay, a secluded spot to hide in. Otherwise, staying in the hotel would have been much more troublesome. As expected, the church began a full-scale search, checking passers-by in the streets and alleys, and forcibly closing off access to the city, its outskirts, and the port. Lister barely dared to leave the house for several days, and the purification team once again caused widespread resentment throughout the city. Fortunately, the newly appointed Bishop of Nejbsburg, Angelo, suppressed the radicals, including the Holy Knight Velius, and restored order to the city. Rumors circulated throughout the streets and alleys that the church was divided and constantly arguing, with the leaders of the purification teams dissatisfied with the new bishop's moderate tendencies. However, the bishop also had a large following. Returning to the witch Lister had rescued, she finally awoke after 3 days of unconsciousness. After figuring out what had happened, she berated her savior. "Who told you to save me? Fool, don't you know how dangerous it was? Idiot," she added sarcastically. "How, is it because of what happened that day that you think you have some responsibility towards me? Still a fledgling, huh? Don't flatter yourself, hey. Don't talk nonsense." I didn't, Lister blushed and resolutely retorted. "I saved you entirely out of a simple sense of justice," he solemnly defended himself. However, the other party's tone, though seemingly ungrateful, actually revealed their annoyance and concern for the innocent people involved. This made Lister realize that the witch was cold on the outside but warm on the inside, and it seemed he hadn't saved the wrong person. Later, due to the city lockdown, the witch stayed at Lister's urging. Since I saved you after all, why don't you stay and help me out?" "What? My boss sent me here to set up an office, and I need an assistant familiar with local intelligence. However, the budget is limited, so I'd like to find someone cheaper." "Why don't you just make do, just handle some paperwork in the room every day, since you still have to deal with the purification team's checks outside, HMPH, you really aren't afraid of getting yourself into trouble." "Fine, since you're not afraid, what can I say? I have nowhere else to go anyway," but judging from the witch's expression, she probably saw him as a lustful man. "Friedrich Lister, representative of Todd Shipping Company in Northwest Bay in Nisburg, nice to meet you." Lister tried to put on a sincere expression, then extended his right hand, only to withdraw it with a slight blush. "Sevia Stini, the witch of Horn Bay, nice to meet you," the witch finally replied in a normal tone, though still lukewarm. Then, he witnessed her astonishing disguise skills. She was practically a completely different person. No wonder she could infiltrate Nejbs for so long and orchestrate the attack on the church undetected. Was this magic? It didn't seem so. Perhaps some ordinary skills, when mastered, could achieve extraordinary effects. After the atmosphere in the city relaxed a bit, Lister, with the help of his female assistant, began looking for an office location. With guidance from locals, the house was settled in almost a week. Then came the scene at the beginning of this chapter. Lister went up to the second floor and cleaned with a witch named Sevia Estini. He wiped the windows while making small talk. "Oh, what a lovely day. Was breakfast alright? If you can't hold a conversation, don't try to be polite." Sorry." A embarrassed Liz turned around and focused intently on wiping the window. Noticing no movement behind her, Sylvia turned back and gave Liz a speechless look. When she agreed to stay, she was determined that if this mortal man had any ill intentions towards her, she would make him regret ever being born. However, after spending some time together, this guy didn't seem to have done anything excessive, nor did he use her favor to make any unreasonable demands. Aside from some clumsy attempts at conversation, he just earnestly assigned tasks. Could it really be as he said? Based on a simple heart of justice? Does such a thing exist in this world? While pondering this, a commotion arose outside the window, seemingly a large group of people shouting something. Sylvia warily dodged, using the curtains to conceal herself, and then quietly peeked out to observe. She glanced at Lister, who seemed unconcerned, staring blankly outside. A large crowd was marching through the street, with more and more people joining them. "Angelo! Angelo!" the parade chanted. "Angelo?" Lister and Severe exchanged a glance. Wasn't that the name of the new bishop of Nejbsburg? Chapter 396 thrown out the window. The two held their breath, watching the bustling crowd outside the window. "Phew," Lister patted his chest. "They're not coming for us, I'll go down and see." Sevia took down her cloak from the wall and started to go downstairs. "Are you crazy? Why are you getting involved?" Lister grabbed her. "Really, didn't this woman know her place?" Sevia turned back, intending to scoff at his cowardice, but seeing the worry on his face, her expression softened. "Don't worry. No one will recognize me now." She pulled away from Lister's hand, put on her cloak, and said, I'm interested in any news about the church." She turned and went downstairs. Sigh. Lister stomped his foot in frustration and followed. "Angelo, Angelo." The street was filled with shouts, the new bishop's name being repeatedly called out. Some were very excited, while others were simply there for the spectacle. Sevia and Lister followed the crowd, discovering they were moving towards the cathedral. "Hey, sir, what's going on?" Lister gently tugged at the sleeve of the man next to him, asking cautiously. "Damn it. Those damned vampires from Collins are coming to exploit us again." The man immediately launched into a barrage of friendly greetings to the so-called vampires. From his somewhat chaotic speech, filled with various corner-based slang terms, Lister understood the cause of the matter. After Sevia made headlines, the church's armed forces maintained a high-pressure policy against Niceburg for a period of time. Later, under the strong advocacy of the new Bishop Angelo, the blockade was lifted. This aroused strong dissatisfaction from Archbishop Elvis of Corner Bay, who was far away in Collins. So he sent an envoy to Niceburg, who reprimanded the Bishop of Niceburg in front of a group of high-ranking clergy, which enraged Angelo's faction. Even worse, the messenger brought with him an order to increase taxes from Collins. To cope with the growing expenses of the so-called purification teams across the region, the newly appointed Archbishop of Horn Bay, Elvis, on the advice of some, added a special religious tax. The church has always levied another religious tax on its believers, tithing, whereby each person must donate 1/10 of their income to the church. However, this tax is not based on actual income, the amount is determined by estimated income, and with current technology, the church cannot accurately calculate an individual's exact income. The new religious tax is also a poll tax, meaning that regardless of income, everyone, including the elderly and children who are unable to work, must pay. What further fueled the resentment of the people of Niceburg was that 90% of the new tax revenue would be handed over to Collins for distribution by the Horn Bay General Church, leaving the local Niceburg church with only a paltry 10%. The news immediately caused a huge uproar, with various undercurrents stirring within Niceburg. Even the Horn Bay Alliance Council, which had previously cooperated with the church in imposing a lockdown, could no longer remain silent. Although the land of Horn Bay had a thriving maritime trade, nearly half of its countries were landlocked. The coastal nations, controlling maritime trade and accumulating vast wealth, were coveted by the landlocked nations, who could only make a living on hills and small plains. These landlocked nations, in particular, were exceptionally devout to the Father and almost blindly obedient to the Church's instructions. Therefore, the Archbishop of Horn Bay resided in Collins, the most powerful of the landlocked nations, not the most economically developed Horn Bay Alliance. The people of the coastal nations suspected that the Church was secretly using tax revenue from them to support the landlocked nations and maintain their loyalty. The council sent a delegation headed by the Marquis of Foster to negotiate with the Archbishop's envoy from Collins. During the negotiations, both sides stuck to their positions and argued endlessly, resulting in a stalemate. The Collins representative was adamant, offering no room for negotiation. To the Archbishop's envoy's anger, a group of clergy led by Angelo, the protagonist of the Niceburg Church, sided with the council in opposing the tax increase. In the envoy's eyes, this was tantamount to betraying the church. With negotiations stalled, a new order from the Archbishop arrived this morning from Collins. Angelo was dismissed from his post as Bishop of Niceburg and sent to Collins for trial on charges of conspiring with witches and corrupting the church. Several other high-ranking members of the Niceburg Church, all of whom were supporters of Angelo, were also dismissed and to be sent there. Public opinion in Niceburg erupted again. Angelo was a highly respected clergyman who, even before becoming bishop, had worked tirelessly to prevent wrongful convictions during witch hunts. After becoming bishop, he had eased the oppressive policies of the past few years, making him very popular. Now, to be sent to Collins, the people naturally objected. Someone instigated it, and a large-scale demonstration spontaneously organized, with more and more people joining along the way, heading straight for the cathedral. So much has happened while we were staying indoors these past few days. Sigh, my office was just about to open when this mess occurred. Lister pulled Sevia to the side of the street, shaking his head and sighing. I want to go see. Sevia looked excited, clearly enjoying the spectacle, probably secretly hoping for a bigger uproar, since it was internal church infighting. No. This kind of situation is prone to stampedes or even riots. We'd better not get involved. Sevia frowned, just a distant look. You go back first." With that, she followed a crowd. Lister reluctantly followed. The two followed the procession to the square in front of the cathedral, which was already packed with people from all over Nijmsburg. "Release them, give us back the bishop, expel the villains of Collins." Shouts rose and fell, and the church knights guarding the church entrance were on high alert, their expressions tense. They had never witnessed such a scene before. Lister quietly asked someone beside him, "Sir, what's the situation inside?" The man replied gravely, "The Marquess of Foster is making a final effort inside." "Alice, I really don't know what Archbishop Elvis is thinking." Just then, the church doors suddenly opened, and to everyone's surprise, Angelo and his entourage emerged, their hands in shackles, escorted by armed guards. A high-ranking priest, with an arrogant expression, loudly demanded that the crowd clear the way. The powder keg had been ignited. The long-suppressed emotions of the crowd in the square were instantly ignited. "This is outrageous, Collins' henchmen," someone shouted, "charge in. Kill these bastards." As if on cue, the crowd immediately formed a hammer and slammed it against the church doors, but was stopped by a line of church knights. The messenger from Collins was enraged. Were these still the father of meek lambs? They were nothing but a mob of thugs. He shouted in a shrill voice, "Anyone who dares to storm the church will be killed without mercy." However, the church knights forming the blockade did not draw their weapons. On the one hand, they were facing ordinary civilians they had known in the city for years. On the other hand, it was currently only a physical shoving match. If there were casualties, they wouldn't be able to stop the crowd once they lost their temper. Besides, there were also many Angelo supporters among the church knights. The thin defensive line was immediately breached. "Outrageous," the messenger's expression changed from anger to fear. "Retreat inside." A group of people hurriedly escorted Angelo and the others into the cathedral and then closed the door. But the door was quickly smashed open, and the angry crowd surged in. "Looks like the Archbishop's messenger is in trouble." At the entrance of the dark alley nearby, Lister and Sevia quietly watched the situation in the cathedral. "HMPH. They brought it on themselves," the witch said disdainfully. Suddenly, a window on the second floor of the cathedral was opened. "Throw him down, throw him down." Waves of shouts came from all directions. "What's happening now?" Lister focused his attention and looked up to the second floor. He saw people shoving each other in the window, then someone was lifted up. With a thud, the person was thrown violently out the window. Before he could even cry out in pain after hitting the ground, he was immediately beaten by the crowd below. Thud, thud, the sounds of bodies hitting the ground rang out one after another. The Archbishop's envoy and his entourage were being thrown out of the windows one by one. Chapter 397 Secret Preparations. As night fell, Nijmsburg, bustling all day, finally quieted down. But this quiet was only evident in the absence of large crowds on the streets. Laughter and chatter could still occasionally drift from the various taverns and other leisure venues. The excitement of the day seemed not to have subsided. In an office of the council, a dozen or so important figures from the Bayhorn Alliance were gathered. However, in stark contrast to the cheerful atmosphere outside, these figures all wore furrowed brows and looked deeply worried. The current council president, Marcus, puffed on his pipe, concealing himself in the thick smoke, as if this could somewhat alleviate his inner turmoil. Marcus Joe Foster sat to the president's right. He looked up and glanced around at everyone, but no one returned his gaze. Ahem, he coughed a few times, drawing the attention of the others. "Speaker, sitting here idly isn't a solution. We should immediately send an envoy to Collins to explain the situation to the Archbishop." It's too late. Before the speaker could speak, Horace, who always advocated a hardline stance against the church, stood up. "Speaker, I suggest that while public sentiment is high, we immediately contact the states of Bayhorn Bay that share our views and form a formal alliance against the church. With superior numbers, they won't dare to act rashly. That's too risky." Just as the debate began in the room, heavy footsteps sounded outside. Everyone looked towards the door. The newcomer was Queller Foster, the second son of the Marquis of Fortes and the current captain of the Nijmsburg Guard. He entered, bowed to those present, and said in a deep voice, "Speaker, esteemed councillors, the situation outside is basically under control. The cathedral area has been sealed off, and all bystanders have been cleared away." Speaker Marcus, his eyes somewhat cloudy, opened his eyelids and asked, "Any casualties?" On both sides, Queller's face was grim. On the civilian side, 5 people died and 13 were injured. On the church side, 6 people died and more than 30 were injured. However, it seems the church knight struck first. Sigh, it doesn't matter who struck first now. Is the Archbishop's messenger still unconscious? Yes, judging from the head injury, he must have hit a hard object upon landing. What about Bishop Angelo? Although he suffered some mental shock, he is physically fine. The cathedral is currently under his control. Speaker Marcus nodded. All right, thank you for your hard work. Go back and rest. Queller placed one hand on his chest, his face full of shame, and said, Speaker, given what happened, the guards responsible for the city's security bear an undeniable responsibility. Please punish me. The speaker waved his hand and said, no one could have predicted this. The guards might bear some responsibility, but it's not enough to warrant punishment. You all summarize your internal discussions and leave, Queller said somewhat heavily. Yes, he glanced at his father beside the speaker before leaving the office. After the door closed, Marcus exhaled a puff of smoke, put down his pipe, and said, Gentlemen, I've decided to take a two-pronged approach. On one hand, I'll send someone to Collins to meet with Archbishop Elvis, explain what happened today, and present our reasonable demands. This is the overt action. On the other hand, I'll contact allies who share our demands and gain their support. This is, of course, a covert operation. He scrutinized each person in the room. I hope this second measure will be kept strictly confidential and will not be discussed in the council. All of you here are people I trust. I hope no one will disappoint me. Foster stood up first, solemnly assuring him, Speaker Marcus, please rest assured, I will keep it strictly confidential. The others followed suit, making the same assurances. Speaker Marcus nodded and said, very well, let's discuss the specific arrangements now. The crowd moved seats around Marcus and sat down, discussing in hushed tones. They carefully considered who should be sent to Collins, what to say to Archbishop Elvis, and how to secretly contact potential allies. During the discussion, someone suggested that in addition to sending an envoy to Collins to meet the Archbishop of Horn Bay, perhaps another envoy should be sent to the papacy headquarters to meet His Holiness the Pope and request his intervention to mediate the conflict between the Horn Bay Church and the Alliance. Many people had doubts about this suggestion. After all, the papacy was the superior of the Horn Bay Church, and there was no reason for them to turn their backs on their own. They would most likely protect their own, and wouldn't the Alliance not only fail to drive away the wolf but also invite a tiger? I had the honor of meeting His Holiness the Pope during my pilgrimage to the Holy Land. He is a kind, just, and compassionate elder. If we explain our difficulties clearly, I believe His Holiness will uphold justice for us, or at least not favor the other side. The Marquess of Foster stood up to support the proposal, and Speaker Marcus, after much hesitation, agreed. The discussion continued until midnight before dispersing in a still heavy atmosphere. Joe, wait a moment, I have something to tell you. Just as the Marquess of Foster was about to leave, Speaker Marcus called him back. The two sat down again. There was no one else in the room. Marcus, what is it that you asked me to say? The speaker looked him straight in the eye. Joe, we must prepare for the worst. The sooner the better. Foster asked in surprise. You mean, yes, war? Will things get that bad? That's why I said the worst. Silence fell over the room. The Marquess of Foster remained silent, and the speaker picked up his pipe again and began to smoke. After a long silence, the Marquess raised his head. All right, what do you need me to do? Marcus replied quietly, replenish our armory. We need to stockpile a large number of weapons for any eventuality. But be careful, it must be done discreetly. Okay, Foster agreed without hesitation, but Marcus also noticed the question in his eyes. You must be wondering why I would assign you this task. A little. The speaker stood up and stomped a few steps around the room. Not long ago, the Kingdom of Waldo ended its civil war. I know, but does that have anything to do with what we're doing now? The speaker nodded. It has a great deal to do with it. Merchants have brought me important information. The Aldo Royal Army is exceptionally well equipped. Not in terms of quality, but in terms of quantity and scale. Almost everyone is armored, and damaged weapons are replenished and replaced promptly. This greatly reduces casualties, thus contributing to the surrender of the rebels. You know how important experienced veterans are to victory. Of course. This has affected the business of our merchants to some extent, because of the competition. They can't sell at satisfactory prices. The Marquess understood the speaker's meaning. If one wanted to stockpile weapons in large quantities, naturally the more supply channels the better. You mean, procure weapons from the weapons workshops within Alder, That's right, Marcus replied affirmatively. However, as I emphasized earlier, this must be done discreetly, so our procurement scope cannot be too broad, otherwise it will be easy for the news to leak out. We must lock onto a few suppliers with strong manufacturing capabilities and stable channels. I understand, I will discreetly screen them. Well, what I'm about to say relates to why I chose you to be in charge of this matter. My investigation has revealed that most of the older army's equipment comes from an organization called Northwest Industries in the Northwest Bay. Northwest Bay, yes, Northwest Bay. That place, which was once considered a barbaric land, and many people didn't even know about it, is now continuously supplying Horn Bay with exquisite porcelain, inexpensive paper, good honeycomb fuel, canned goods popular with sailors, and large quantities of iron products. Lord of Light, something magical must have happened on that land. And I've heard, Marcus paused. Your family has some connection with the Northwest Bay? Oh, don't misunderstand me. Yes, Marcus Foster nodded. My second son is quite close friends with a lord there, and my family's caravans often do business there. There was no point in hiding it. In fact, a large portion of the goods the speaker mentioned were transported to Horn Bay by the Foster family. Let me add something, the speaker said. What you just mentioned is basically oil from a place called Arda, where the lord is the friend of my son I mentioned earlier. The speaker nodded and said, I suspect that the so-called Northwest industry is also very likely related to Arda. If so, I would like to use your family's relationship with this lord to complete our plan to strengthen our military. What do you think? Foster replied seriously. This is my inescapable responsibility. Very good, I knew I made the right choice by choosing you, my old friend, the speaker said with some emotion, then immediately reminded him, your identity is special, and going there in person will attract attention, so you need to send someone trustworthy and discreet. I know, I'll have my two sons go there under the guise of business. Anyway, my family's caravans often travel there. Very good. Also, regarding that lord, we need to find out a few things. First, his attitude towards the church, of course, don't let him know about our conflict with the church. Second, how much influence does the Aldo royal family have on him, to prevent the church from pressuring him through the royal family and cutting off our supply. I will find out all of these things. If this lord is a reliable man and values the friendship with your family enough, I'd like to entrust him with all our initial orders. Of course, that's assuming he has sufficient supply capacity. This, Marcus Foster was taken aback. Speaker, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. Marcus shook his head. Secrecy is more important. The fewer people who know, the better. If someone with ulterior motives finds out about our military buildup, wouldn't we be in a very passive position? Others will think we intend to start a war. And the arms workshop owners here in Horn Bay, HMPH, I wonder how many of them are devout followers of the church. The Northwest Bay is far enough from here to be a good place to manufacture and store weapons, and relying on the sea routes between the two places also greatly avoids interference from land forces. Alright, I understand. The Marcus nodded in agreement. Speaker Marcus squinted and took 2 puffs of his pipe. After explaining everything, he breathed a sigh of relief. By the way, what is this lord's name? Paul Gleman. Chapter 398. Take 2 steps forward, take 1 step back. Achoo, Paul sneezed loudly. The sneeze was quite untimely, as the Earl was currently seeing off guests. Paul took out a handkerchief and wiped his nose, thinking to himself, I wonder which young lady is missing me from afar. He then gave the group an apologetic smile. These were wealthy men from the countryside, or rather, gentry, who had been invited to the Lord's manor for a banquet. Your Excellency, the night air has been quite chilly lately, please take care of yourself, a richly dressed, portly man quickly said to him. Paul nodded, haha, thank you for the reminder, Mr. Bodden. Not at all, not at all, Bodden replied with a fawning smile. After everyone had said their farewells, some rode horses, others took carriages, and under the moonlight, they left the Lord's manor in 2s and 3s. Paul stood at the door watching the crowd leave. Once everyone was gone, he turned to the 4 men behind him, Myron, Old Ford, Hansel, and Old Philip, and asked, what do you think of their attitude? Today, he had hosted a banquet for prominent gentry from various regions, and Paul had once again touted his customs union proposal. Philip, the Lord Steward, shook his head, looking indignant. My lord, he said, they are wealthy, but they have no titles, not even knighthood. For you and Lord Garner to host them is already a great favor. To condescend to send a group of commoners to the door like this would be a laughingstock. Philip, I didn't ask you that, honestly. What was the old steward thinking? Old Ford, the experienced steward of the Council of State, stroked his beard and said, most of them are just going through the motions. Only Baden has shown any real enthusiasm. Ever since Baden was severely punished by Paul during the Salt riots, he had taken Paul's instructions to heart. The four returned to the hall where the banquet had been held and sat down. The servants had already cleaned up the messy table. Paul said firmly, the customs union issue needs to be resolved by next year. The Heller family of Portree and the Parker family of Larnaca have already reached a preliminary agreement with me, and we, as the initiators, cannot hold them back. The opposition from Alda and Byron stemmed from the long-standing laissez-faire rule of the Gleman and Gardner families. In contrast, the landowners of Emden, which had recently come under their control, dared not utter a sound. Their former lord, Earl Kent, was a powerful ruler, and even if his subordinates engaged in underhanded tactics, they dared not speak out openly. Therefore, Earl Gleman, who had defeated the Kent family, was now considered a demon king in the eyes of those lords. According to the verbal agreement among the lords, Alda authorized the use of a range of technologies, including paper-making, canning, printing press manufacturing, shipbuilding, and salt production, and open up the sale of agricultural machinery such as seed drills, harvesters, and threshing machines, as well as flying shuttle looms and spinning jenny, in exchange for the support of the two regions for the patent system and the customs union. Since these essential technologies for people's livelihoods have already taken root in the private sector and are being produced in private workshops, it's almost impossible to keep them secret from other areas. It's only a matter of time before they spread beyond the jurisdiction of the State Council. It's better to use them to gain public consensus on the patent system, even if it's just a superficial consensus. As for the highly profitable porcelain, the iron smelting technology that secured Paul's position as the top industrialist in the Northwest, the coke production technology, and the firearms manufacturing technology that countless people are eager to learn about, they remain highly classified. HMPH. If they still don't know what's good for them next year, then we'll see if their heads are harder than my bullets, Paul said bitterly. Hansel's eyes darted around, and he asked, Lord Gleman, in our past conversations you've always revealed many ideas. So what are the things you've decided to do? Why don't you tell us, especially about the countryside? Yes, I want to liberate those poor serfs, I want to abolish the disgusting tax farming system, I want to ban private courts and take back judicial power, and I also want to confiscate, having drunk some wine at the banquet, and with most of the people present being quite open-minded, Paul spoke his mind without any reservations. However, he stopped when he got to the last point, to confiscate church property. That really cuts right to their core. Hansel thought for a moment, then smiled and said, Lord Gleman, in that case, why not use a 3 steps forward, 2 steps back strategy? Paul asked curiously, what is 3 steps forward, 2 steps back? Hansel explained, when I was His Majesty's tax collector at Jingayo, I remember one year the government urgently needed to increase taxes. After the first order was issued, the people were furious. After a while, a second order came, reducing the tax increase by 2/3. This time, the people's resentment lessened considerably, and many even began to praise His Majesty's benevolence. But according to my inquiries with friends, the government subsequently collected the planned tax revenue. Paul's eyes lit up. You mean? Hansel nodded. Yes, why not release more information about your planned reforms, or simply issue a decree directly? This will inevitably stir up a wave of opposition. Then, by making a compromise, withdrawing the secondary objectives first, and keeping the main ones, the resistance encountered should be less. Paul stroked his faint mustache. Raising prices on the spot, then lowering them on the spot, Old Ford said with some concern, reforms that are changed so frequently might affect the Earl's authority as a lord. Hansel explained, that's called expediency. A lord's prestige comes from what he ultimately accomplishes, even if the process is a bit convoluted. Myron offered a compromise, let's take 2 steps forward, then 1 step back, making smaller concessions. Let's do as Myron says, otherwise it'll be too embarrassing, Paul decided. The customs union is the primary objective at present. As for which other objectives to use as cover, that needs careful consideration. The group discussed in detail for a while until 9 o'clock in the evening when Hansel took his leave, while Myron and Old Ford stayed. Paul stood by the window, watching Hansel's departing figure, and asked his sworn brother beside him, "What do you think of Hansel?" Melon mentally concluded, "A very capable man." The land consolidation was completed so quickly thanks to him, Paul said. Indeed, his suggestion earlier was good too, he sighed. Unfortunately, he's ultimately someone sent by the royal family to our side. Perhaps his experience in the Northwest Bay is just a brief journey in his life, Melon laughed, but that's precisely why he acted so recklessly, offending quite a few people while overseeing the land survey. Haha, you're right. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 399 Big Business. In October, as the land northwest of Aldo turned golden, Lakeside Town welcomed several unexpected guests, Quiller Foster and his elder brother, Gaius Foster. "Welcome, gentlemen from Horn Bay." Paul hosted a banquet for them at the Lord's Manor, with Melon in attendance. He had only heard of Quiller's brother before. According to Quiller himself, Gaius was far more capable than his younger brother, managing almost the entire family business, allowing their father to devote himself fully to politics. "What brings you here?" Through previous correspondence, Paul had learned that Quiller had been assigned to the Nipsburg Guard by their father, preventing him from traveling freely around the world. Quiller laughed heartily. "Naturally, because I missed my little brother dearly," Paul chuckled, taking it as a joke. The Foster family's business in the Northwest Bay was managed by Christopher. The fact that the family's eldest son had been sent meant something important was definitely happening. While his brother and Paul were talking, Gaius Foster carefully observed the two lords before him, especially Earl Paul Gleman. From the distant view of Port Franklin on the sea all the way to Lake Town, the journey had been full of surprises. Before this, he had always thought that the so-called Northwest Bay was just a remote and isolated place in the kingdom of Aldo, perhaps with some unusual goods recently produced, but with valuable furs and medicinal herbs hidden in the sparsely populated deep forests. How could a place he had never heard of before become prosperous overnight? But along the way, the busy cargo ships in the harbor, the expanding docks, the constant flow of merchants, the good security, and the wide and sturdy roads between cities had greatly overturned his previous impression of this land. Perhaps it was still some distance from the prosperity he had imagined, but it was definitely vibrant. This was something his homeland lacked. Horn Bay had experienced hundreds of years of prosperity, and even with further development, it would remain the same, never experiencing that sense of burgeoning growth. To his surprise, Earl Gleman had brought along his sworn brother, Earl Myron Gardner, to the banquet. Based on previous intelligence, he had speculated that the Gardner family's territory had been annexed by the Gleman family to some extent, and that Myron Gardner, though still holding the title of Lord, was merely a puppet. However, it now seemed that this wasn't the case. If Myron Gardner were truly a puppet, Paul wouldn't have so readily allowed him to interact with an outsider like himself. Moreover, Myron seemed completely at ease and unreserved in Paul's presence, showing no signs of coercion. Perhaps, as his brother had suggested, the two were united by shared interests. Paul and Queller's conversation came to an end. Gaius smiled slightly and said in fluent Aldo, "Count Gleman, although a long time has passed, please allow me to thank you again for saving my brother's life." "Haha, you're too kind. Mr. Gaius, is there something important that you've come to the Northwest Bay in person?" Insincere talk wasn't Paul's forte, so he went straight to the point. Gaius remained silent for a long time, seemingly preparing his words, before finally saying softly, "I have indeed come with a mission." Seeing Queller's serious expression, Paul became interested and listened intently. "Oh," Gaius glanced at Melon. "Who is accompanying him?" Paul, sensing his hesitation, explained, "Please rest assured, just speak frankly." Gaius then said, "As far as we know, Northwest Industries, under the Count's leadership, played a significant role in the civil war in Aldo. Therefore, I've come to conduct an on-site inspection. I wonder if you could grant me this favor." Paul glanced at Melon, and the two exchanged a knowing smile. It seemed Northwest Industries' reputation had already spread. Paul replied, "Fairness is certainly possible, but what is Mr. Gaius's purpose? You see, our Northwest Industries' main product is armor." Gaius stood up and said, "I won't hide it. I've come to Northwest Bay representing the entire Horn Bay Alliance, specifically to purchase armaments." Paul was surprised, not expecting this. The Alliance sent me here to seek a long-term cooperative agreement with your Excellency. In the future, if unfortunately, Gaius seemed hesitant, we may need a large amount of military equipment, including various weapons, armor, and so on. He then added, but please rest assured, our purchase of military equipment is definitely not aimed at Aldo, a huge deal. Paul was secretly excited. Was the Horn Bay Alliance about to start a war? But, Your Excellency, can you keep this a secret? Paul patted his chest and assured them, please rest assured, keeping our clients' secrets is one of our service principles. Gaius then said, then I need to confirm whether you have sufficient production capacity to meet our needs. I don't know the Alliance's demand, at least 10,000 sets of infantry armor, 10,000 longswords, 30,000 spearheads, and 50,000 bows and arrows. This. Paul and Melon were shocked. If they bought it all, this would be a huge deal worth millions of silver coins. This is just the initial demand. Considering the losses and replacements once war breaks out, we will increase the demand. Haha. Paul tried hard not to drool, but he was overjoyed. So, what kind of delivery do you require? Within a year and a half. No problem. Paul patted his chest. Northwest Industries has over 50 factories and workshops of varying sizes, a large number of skilled craftsmen, and ample raw material supplies. We can certainly meet your needs. Besides, due to the previous rebellion in the south, we still have plenty of reserves. Hearing Paul's introduction, Gaius was slightly relieved and said, but I still hope to see your production site with my own eyes. Paul nodded. How about this? Tomorrow I'll take you to a factory near Lake Town. There you'll find what you're looking for. I'm very grateful for that. Gaius raised his glass to toast Paul. I sincerely hope we can reach this cooperation. Paul immediately returned the toast, and their glasses clinked together with a crisp sound. That's what I've been hoping for too. After finishing his drink, Paul asked again, if it's convenient, could you tell me if the Alliance feels threatened? The Foster brothers both looked troubled. Your Excellency, please forgive our rudeness. There are some things that are really inconvenient to say. Haha, then let's just talk business. Paul smiled brightly. In fact, based on the information Cecil had given him about Horn Bay, he could roughly guess what the higher-ups in Nisberg were preparing for. Chapter 400 Folk Workshops. Mr. Erkins got up very early this morning. Before dawn, he began to groom himself, carefully trimming his beard. After a quick breakfast, he hurried to his workplace, an ironworks on the outskirts of Lake Town. When he arrived, all the employees were already there. Standing on a wooden crate, Erkins said very seriously, give me your best today. Be on your toes, don't worry, boss, we won't let anyone look down on us, the employees responded in unison. Today, a very important person was coming to visit. Erkins came from a family of blacksmiths. In earlier years, blacksmithing was a highly skilled and sought-after profession. Of course, being a blacksmith is still a good choice now, but it's not quite as sought-after as it used to be. The reason for this is the development of technology. First, because Earl Griles improved iron smelting technology, raw materials were no longer a constraint. Then came the rapid development of the Lakeside Machinery Factory. The factory needed a large number of metal parts, initially ordering them from local blacksmith shops. However, these blacksmith shops were generally family-run workshops scattered throughout Arda, making the process time-consuming. Furthermore, Earl Gremmen's dimensional requirements for various parts were notoriously demanding, even inventing a measuring tool called a vernier caliper. However, due to various reasons, the quality of the products manufactured by these small shops varied greatly. Therefore, the machinery factory began training its own blacksmiths. As the lords of the estate, the Gremmen family maintained a group of blacksmiths who had served them for generations, arguably the most skilled blacksmiths in all Arda. For example, Mr. Herman, whom Erkins had previously admired, was the most skilled blacksmith in the Lord's Manor. However, Erkins hadn't seen Mr. Herman much in the last 2 years. It was said that the Lord had entrusted him with important responsibilities and he was no longer in Lakeside. Earl Gremmen has now placed all these people in the machine factory, employing a method similar to that used at the Wise Academy to recruit and train blacksmith apprentices. Unlike blacksmiths elsewhere who are required to be proficient in everything, the Earl only requires them to be able to forge one component, but they must hone their skills to perfection. These newly trained young blacksmiths repeat a set of simple actions day after day in the so-called workshop. Some slightly more complex items are even forged by several people in succession, each completing only a part before handing it over to the next, until the entire piece is finished. However, the inspection of the results at each stage is also strict, with dedicated personnel supervising each step and checking with measuring tools. Blacksmiths with too low a pass rate will have their wages reduced or even lose their jobs. For commoners, the wages in the machine factory are quite generous, so everyone works diligently. Not only blacksmiths, but also carpenters in the machine factory use this working method. After fulfilling the demand for parts for large machinery such as four-wheeled carriages and harvesters, the machine factory began producing smaller products, such as hoes, rakes, and pitchforks, common agricultural tools, and sold them at very low prices. This greatly impacted the livelihoods of traditional craftsmen. However, they were squeezed by workshops under the powerful Arda territory. As commoners, no one dared to organize the craftsmen to fight against a lord. Necessity is the mother of invention, and some well-off craftsmen began to expand their production scale, recruiting blacksmiths and carpenters to join their ranks and learn the working methods of the machine factory. Thus, workshops were forced into existence. Strangely enough, instead of hiding their competition, Paul Gleman summoned these new workshop owners to visit his machine factory, allowing them to observe the workflow closely, and announced an encouragement for their entrepreneurship, offering a 3-year tax exemption. Awakens was one such workshop owner who had transitioned from a traditional blacksmith. Looking back on the early days of his business, it was truly a difficult time. Despite his family's generations of blacksmithing, Awakens had some savings, but it was far from enough to purchase premises, hire workers, and acquire tools. Awakens tried raising funds at the stock exchange in Franklin Harbor, but as a non-traditional businessman with no reputation to attract customers, he had to resort to the traditional method of begging from friends and family for money, finally managing to establish his workshop with great difficulty. However, due to the early advantage of the Lakeside Machinery Factory, its low prices and high quality quickly captured the market, leaving many private workshops struggling to survive, some quietly closing down. Awakens' workshop suffered the same fate. Just when he felt he couldn't go on and was disheartened enough to close the workshop and find work at the Lord's Machinery Factory to pay off his debts, a turning point arrived. Under the leadership of Paul Gleman, the Lords of the Northwest established a company called Northwest Industries, whose main business was selling arms to the Southern Kingdom government. The workshop owners who hadn't yet gone bankrupt were summoned to a meeting at the Lord's Manor. The Earl claimed to have found them a way to make money, joining Northwest Industries and supplying goods to this company. The Earl also stated that his controlled industries wouldn't produce weapons like swords and armor, thus avoiding competition and allowing them to produce with confidence. They didn't need to worry about transportation. Northwest Industries would handle that, as long as they delivered on time. There were 2 additional requirements. First, a unified design style that would leave a lasting impression on customers, making it instantly recognizable as Northwest Bay products, and second, strict quality control. As soon as Paul Gleman finished speaking, the workshop owners cheered. Long live the Lord! Everyone knew war was a lucrative opportunity, especially in the arms trade. Although many of them were still cursing the Earl's machine shop for not leaving them any way to survive as they entered the Lord's Manor. Awakens, in the hall, was even in tears. He had almost lost everything. He was sincerely grateful to the Earl. Upon further inquiry, it turned out that a rebellion had broken out in the distant south, and the kingdom's government was scrambling to buy weapons. Awakens sighed, realizing he should pay more attention to current events. Focusing solely on his own small plot of land wouldn't lead to wealth. He then chuckled at his own absurd thought, wondering if the Earl had established Northwest Industries simply to provide a way out for unfortunate souls like them. Subsequently, a steady stream of arms orders from the south revived the private workshops, allowing them to not only establish themselves but also amass a fortune. Awakens himself joined the ranks of the wealthy. However, with the end of the suppression of the rebellion, the demand for arms in the south plummeted. Finding new business opportunities became Awakens' top priority. Just as he was racking his brains, news spread from the Lord's mansion that a major client had arrived from Horn Bay. Awakens' workshop was chosen for the new client's visit, with the Earl himself leading the visitor. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.